Chapter 1128. Huaishir was really not good at getting along with strict people. It was even more difficult to deal with someone like Ying Fangzhou, who was square and old-fashioned and absolutely could not tolerate sand in his eyes. It was fine if the senior scoffed at him and felt that he could not be trained, but Ying Fangzhou had greater confidence and expectations for Huaishir than he did for himself. Ever since he had been summoned, he had been making every second count, hoping that Huaishir would be able to improve even more so that he could teach her everything he knew. Time was not on his side. If the conditions allowed, he would probably want to become some kind of system and hang on Huaishir, helping him to automatically train and increase his skill proficiency. Chicken. Give me a good chicken. From morning till night. 80 cram schools, and chickens would give birth to a bright future for utopia. At the very least, he had to avoid making the same mistakes back then as for the cause of his death back then. Ying Fangzhou only had one conclusion. I'm not strong enough. Therefore, Huaishir, you must be stronger than me. As for how much stronger, it should be about 40 times stronger, right? Therefore, in order to ensure that she wouldn't be killed by Ying Fangzhou's hell cram school, Huaishir tried her best to take a breather during the busy teaching process. She tried her best to lower her aptitude and expectations in Ying Fangzhou's heart. The ideal result was, of course, what? Other people's children can get a double score, but our child just passed. It doesn't matter, he's a retard. He's already worked very hard. However, Huaishir also knew that this was unrealistic, but at least he could touch it for a while. He didn't skip class, so couldn't he slack off? Unfortunately, such a beautiful dream was completely destroyed by a rat man who came out of nowhere. It could be foreseen how tragic his life would be next. Do you know how miserable it is to practice purification from the moment you open your eyes in the morning until you close your eyes at night? Huaishir sighed softly and raised his eyes. I finally stole a chicken. Why do people always want to snatch my eggs? A mournful howl burst forth. Behind him, the tentacle-like vines suddenly stretched out and grew wildly. In the blink of an eye, they crossed a distance of over 100 meters. From the sudden spike, the surface of the vines quickly hardened and turned pitch black, turning into a steel-like texture. Like the strings of a zither, it buzzed as if it was crying, tearing through the air. In an instant, it pierced through the skeletal giant rat's face, pierced through its eye sockets, and came out from the back of its head. What? In the instant that the rat man cried out in alarm, that strange face with wood grain was already right in front of him, and a creepy smile appeared on his face. Above the raised right arm, countless branches intertwined with each other, forming a giant fist that was like a hammer. The roots that had taken root in the soil pierced downwards once again. After they merged with the roar of the earth, they endlessly mobilized this silent power and placed it on the iron fist. Then they blasted out. Mastery, symphony. The roar of the earth separated from Huaishir's right arm along with the vine iron fist and poured into the body of the rat man. In an instant, the skeletal armor was broken and exploded from the middle. In the midst of the debris, a large hole appeared. Black smoke and steam spewed out from it. The power that exceeded one's normal state did not have to worry about the resonance with a larger territory that would damage one's body. Instead, it released this power in a self-destructive way. Huaishir had become the conductor of the sky and the earth. He wantonly released this terrifying power. That punch only peeled off a layer of skin from Huaishir's right hand. But soon, under the spreading of vitality, the plants quickly grew back and healed. No more damage was done. Then, before he landed on the ground, he had already raised his right leg in midair. He kicked the skeletal giant rat's distorted face. Trample! In an instant, countless cracks appeared on the surface of the bones. The moat, the defensive measures, and everything else were completely destroyed by this pure brute force. The giant rat staggered backward. The autocannon in its hand was still spinning wildly, spewing out terrifying firepower. As if it was cheating, countless huge bone cannonballs flew in the air. In the end, they all whistled in the direction of Huaishur. None of them missed. What responded to them was a sincere and righteous punch that was hurled forward. 3 thunderbolts. Skyfall. It was just a punch, but it stirred up a storm. Wherever the pale waves passed, all the cannonballs were crushed. The fragments flew backward and nailed on the giant rat's body like a rainstorm, tearing countless cracks. For the first time, Huaishur felt every detail and change of the skyfall so clearly, and the final effect that it caused. The principle behind it was just a temporary release of the kinetic energy of the punch in the air. In a short distance, it spread out like a bomb, resulting in a terrifying effect, as if the sky was collapsing. Only by really cheating to reach such a level, Huaishur could deeply understand the meaning of the Sword Saint. This level was not even supreme. It was just skillful. Practice makes perfect. On the arm, the tragic cracks between the bones, and the muscles quickly closed and disappeared. Instead, layers of scale-like leaves grew again. Under the premise that it did not affect the flexibility, it strengthened the hardness. The Achilles tendons of both legs were strengthened. Then, with an explosive power overload, you step. In the blink of an eye, the long distance was crossed. Huaishur was already in front of the giant rat once again. The vine hands behind him swung casually, pierced and tore apart the machine gun on the giant rat's arm. And among the countless scattered parts, the flame of the axe of wrath reignited. Slash! The sound of fate knocking on the giant rat's door flashed and disappeared. A deep crack appeared on the giant rat's chest. 4 cracks crisscrossed and broke the outer layer of defense. The spear of compassion was thrust forward. The giant rat's folded hands cracked in front of the spear. The speed of rebirth could not stop the damage, leaving a penetrating wound on the waist of the steam armor. That's it. That's it. It can't be, right? The mountain ghost laughed sinisterly and raised his hand to tear open the giant rat's shell. The vines behind him pierced in like a spear, wantonly destroying. Loud booms continued, and the rat man's tragic screams could no longer be heard. Now, it was impossible to tell who was more like a monster. Even Huaishur himself was a little uncertain. Perhaps his current state could also be called purification, right? It was just a habit of opportunism and wanting to be lazy. Therefore, he hoped to solve the problem in a way that he was better at, and finally reached such a realm by accident. However, the aspect that Huaishur used was not his own complicated skills, but the pure, single sacred mark in his body. The so-called focus was sometimes very troublesome for Huaishur, but sometimes it was actually very simple. It was enough as long as he played. So, on the other hand, why couldn't he use the skills that he used on the enemy himself? He also brought his own sacred mark into the control of Supreme. Catalyze. After breaking the balance between a second stage ascendant and a miracle, he deliberately caused the sacred mark to go out of control, and then transformed himself, approaching the mountain ghost without limit. In the end, he was able to break through the limit of his level and completely unleash his hidden power. 2 stages in advance, he achieved the origin substance mutation of his body. After swallowing all the vitality left by the heretic king in one breath, Huaishur's body was now infinitely close to the original form of the sacred mark, and it was not an exaggeration to call him a real mountain ghost. Unfortunately, due to gender, he was not fated to have the beauty of the legends, and could only show the dark side of the mountain ghost. A 100-year-old owl has become a wood ghost, and laughter rises from the jade fire nest. Huaishur tilted his head and looked at the giant rat's trembling face. "Are you scared?" Accompanied by his words, the sound of thunder in the distance struck again. A loud sound like the sound of mountains burst forth, spreading along the ground. Yun Zhongxuan's angry flames could be vaguely seen, as well as the battle and struggle on the other side. "Senior, it's hard to be a bodyguard, and you're even injured." He sighed softly. "Looks like I don't have time to play with you. Let's speed up." It was just as he said. Fast forward. In the blink of an eye, it was as if a long time had passed. The mountain ghost, who had been accumulating power in place, suddenly appeared in front of the enemy, enduring the flames and the bombardment of the bombs and mines. Branches grew on his raised arms, and once again they turned into giant fists as hard as iron. They smashed down brazenly. The giant fists and armor exploded together, and the giant skeletal rat screamed and staggered back. Then, in Huaishur's hand, the sword of virtue burst out with flames. Under the influence of the life force, the sword of dark green flames swept across, almost cutting the giant rat in half. The rat man screamed, "Align! Align, all of you!" It widened its scarlet eyes and screamed. Suddenly, it reached out and forced the two halves of its body to join together. The broken bones gradually healed, and it returned to its original state. "You can even put this together?" Huaishur sighed. "Your company's cohesion is extraordinary." "Ah, how do you put it in your words?" "Ridiculous," the rat man roared angrily. "I have long completed the content ecological closed loop after decentering. You, who happen to stand at the flow outlet, can't hurt me at all. Just wait for my link." "That's enough." Huaishur shook his head and interrupted him uninterestedly. He asked straightforwardly, "Is there any use in doing those fancy things all day long?" The rat man was stunned for a moment. The moment he was stared at by the mountain ghost's cold gaze. A creepy chill crept up his body. Those messy words and titles are all smokescreens and cover-ups, right? Huaishur impatiently exposed the disguise of magic. Your set of things is just a flawed version of the framework that is similar to the laws of the Creator through Gaia's blood. In essence, it's just forcefully turning other people into your things through agreements or contracts, right? In fact, you're just a winner after usurping other people's contributions and efforts. Huaishur sneered and told him, "Cohesion, loyalty, family, no matter how nice it sounds. Once there are no other people in your framework, you're nothing. Well, other than being a joke." "How dare you?" An ear-piercing scream of madness and uncontrollable came from the stunned giant skeletal rat. Pitch-black smoke continuously spewed out from the gaps of the bones. Too much blood energy had dyed the smoke into a dazzling scarlet, as if it was burning. Amidst countless hoarse murmurs that were getting louder and louder, the 8 arms of the giant rat were surrounded by dazzling light. Like wind tunnels, they emitted an invisible suction force that distorted reality. The miracle created by Gaia's blood was now in its fist. "I've decided, Huaishur." A hoarse voice came from the gaps of the giant skeletal rat, full of anger and resentment. "Today, I'm going to use this combination of punches made for the ecology of hell to completely tear your stinky mouth apart." The mountain ghost grinned. It was as if he was disdainful. He stood where he was and only hooked his finger. Just like that, amidst the roaring of the giant skeletal rat's mad dash, Huaishur took half a step forward and bent down slightly. He took a deep breath. Resonance begin. At that moment, the lightning in the distance flashed, the earth trembled, the strong wind blew, and even the corpse that had been silent for many years behind him flashed like an illusion. There was a slight tremor. The invisible waves contracted inward. The closer they got, the more violent they became. In the end, They formed a pale wave in the air and converged on the mountain ghost's mutated fist. Huaishir closed his eyes. He listened to the vast sound that burst out from his body towards the enemy, towards the front of him. One punch. At that moment, the rat orc's roar, the roar of the armor, the sound of the siren, and even the loud thunderclap were all swallowed up by the invisible monster. Only the sound of cracking was left. From Huaishir's arm, cracks suddenly appeared, expanded, and spread. In the end, starting from his fingertips, half of his body shattered together. As for the remaining half, there were many deep cracks on it. However, soon, when blood seeped out, a brand new skin grew out from it, once again mending the incomplete body. However, after peeling off a layer of bark-like outer shell, Huaishir's appearance had returned to its original appearance. Thanks to the squandering just now, the vitality that had not been in the account for long was left with nothing, and right in front of him, in the strong wind, the last whimper of the skeletal rat dissipated with the flying ashes and disappeared. As the limbs and body collapsed, the entire armor began to evaporate at a speed visible to the naked eye, just like the market value of the company before it went bankrupt. Speaking of which, the sound just now was not art, nor was it a symphony. It was just rubbish noise after some random high-pitched sounds were piled together. Huaishir lowered his head and rubbed his wrist. He said casually, well, just think of it as renovation, which was specially created for you. Just like that, in the explosion of the renovation, the frame formed by the broken steel parts also collapsed. A rickety rat orc fell out of it in a sorry state. It was still mumbling words such as track, comma, link, comma, sink, and other words that others could not understand at all. Impossible, impossible. How could my project be cut in half by you before it was released? It raised its head and screamed, hysterically, Eternal World Group will never let you go. One day, you and that bitch Sunmaker will fall into a situation 100,000 times worse than mine. Definitely. Really? Huaishir was surprised. Is there any job worse than being a tool for the Heavenly Literature Society? He did not care if the rat orc scolded or cursed him. It was just like how Eternal World Group loved to work overtime and contribute. No matter what happened, as a professional idol, his professionalism would never go offline. He had to do what he had to do, and he had to finish what he had to do. Now, Huaishir held the axe in his hand tightly, aimed it at the rat orc's skull, and gestured slightly. Watch me, splitting Mount Hua. With a muffled sound, the rat orc's scream of horror came to an abrupt end. In the dead silence, it lowered its head and saw a kick on its crotch. Its trembling legs could no longer support itself, and it knelt on the ground weakly. Isn't it? Splitting Mount Hua, it looked at Huaishir in a daze. It made a squeaking sound and was about to cry. I did it backwards. Huaishir scratched his head and comforted it. Don't worry, I'll make it up for you. As he spoke, he stabilized it and raised the axe again. Splitting Mount Hua, bang! Accompanied by the sound of something breaking, blood spurted out, and the head fell to the ground. It was still not split. Decapitated. Sorry. Huaishir lowered his head and looked at the rat orc's desperate expression. He shrugged helplessly. It was convenient. In the pool of blood, the rat orc's lips opened and closed for the last time. It seemed to be cursing. Soon, it was covered by layers of flowers that grew out. Bursts of fragrance spread in the wind, making people feel relaxed and happy. When Huaishir turned around and looked at the figure behind him, he smiled. You're done so quickly? I was going to go and support you. There's no need. Ying Fangzhou's beard was dyed scarlet, and his face was expressionless. Golden Dawn is getting worse and worse with each generation. They look decent, but once they start fighting with their lives, They become useless snacks. Huaisha shrugged. He didn't know if he should agree or feel helpless. In any case, among the people he knew, in terms of fighting with their lives, there weren't many who could compete with the old senior himself. However, looking at Ing Fangzhou's gloomy expression, it didn't seem like he had won a great victory. You didn't kill it? He asked in confusion. Ing Fangzhou reached out expressionlessly and threw a tattered book out of his pocket. On the blood-stained and broken cover, one could vaguely make out the handwriting of life's broken chapter. There was something that could die for me. It ran away. He replied unhappily and glanced behind Huaisha. He frowned. But your opponent, why is he still alive? Yes, he's still alive. Huaisha turned around and looked at the ground. There's no rush. If you want to raise flowers, it's better to have a living one than a dead one. It's up to you. Ing Fangzhou withdrew his gaze and didn't look anymore. Instead, he raised his palm and pointed at the cracked head of the snake next to him. The sharp light that had been brewing in the celestial palace for a long time fell from the sky. In an instant, a straight crack appeared on the snake's skull. It penetrated through, and Ing Fangzhou's expression was slightly sluggish. He didn't expect that this thing couldn't be completely destroyed by his attack. Was it because the injury affected his performance, or was he really too old to be useful? He sighed faintly and reached out his hand. An invisible gravitational force pulled the glow of Gaia's blood out of it, shrank it into a ball, and threw it into Huaisha's hand. Have you thought about how to use it? He supported dead water and sat on the ground. It's a rare opportunity. Don't waste it. Huaisha. Don't worry. I've already thought about it. Huaisha smiled slightly, lowered his head, and stared at the phantom light rising from his fingertips. What do you want? Huaisha? That kind of hallucinatory question rang in Huaisha's ears again. He looked back, glanced at the severely injured senior, sighed softly, and made a wish. Please, someone who can cure Ing Fangzhou, can cure him in any sense. It's best to have a healer. Huaisha finally added. At that moment, a dazzling light erupted from his hand and suddenly soared into the sky. Countless scenes flowed out from the Book of Destiny and gathered at Huaisha's fingertips, reproducing a member on the former catalog. An ancient book full of vicissitudes appeared in Huaisha's hand. Then it left his hand and unfolded. Countless pages flipped, forming the outline of the former card. Amidst the sandstorm, a pair of dirt-stained leather boots stepped on the flowers planted by Sephora. The various tools and ropes hanging from the backpack around his waist swayed slightly. The old hell explorer raised his head and looked at the world in front of him again. In the dead silence, Huaisha stared blankly with his eyes wide open. Really, there's a healer? After a long time, he subconsciously bent down and bowed with his hand on his chest. Long time no see, Ms. Chaz Hell. Chapter 1129. At this moment, it was in the flying yellow sand. In the silence, old Madame Evelyn's eyes moved slightly, as if she had just woken up from a long sleep. However, there was no confusion or bewilderment in his eyes. The moment she saw Huaisha, her eyelids lifted slightly. Is it you? Evelyn suddenly sighed softly. I see, she seemed to have understood something at that moment, but she was not so shocked and did not say anything. She lowered her head and sniffed the tobacco in the jar. Then she stuffed it into the pipe slowly. Finally, she said softly, You really played a trick under my nose. Sensing the hidden meaning behind his words, Huaisha subconsciously shrank back a little, wanting to defend herself. The reason is really hard to explain in a few words. It doesn't matter. Anyway, I'm dead, and the living have nothing to do with me. Instead, you have to work harder. Evelyn tilted her head. inhaled, lit the pipe, and slowly exhaled a wisp of smoke. Suddenly, she asked, "Is she all right?" Huaisha was stunned. Then, he realized that the line of sight behind the smoke had suddenly become sharp. It was like a knife pointing at the scumbag. It was shining brightly. Huaisha involuntarily straightened his back and answered in a trembling voice, "Thank you for taking care of me. I'm eating well and sleeping well." "Oh," Evelyn nodded slightly, and then asked, "What about her?" In a short silence, Huaisha wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and smiled flatteringly. "She's the same. She's the same." Evelyn's sigh became meaningful again, which made Huaisha tremble more and more under the gaze. But in the end, the old madam suddenly smiled. "As for that one, I won't ask." Evelyn took the pipe from the corner of her mouth and sighed with relief. "Since you can still be alive and kicking, she should be better, right? She's eating better and sleeping longer." He wiped his sweat and carefully answered the old lady's question. "It's not a small good, it's a big good." His heart, that had just risen, had already sunk to the bottom of the valley. He was about to burst into tears. Now, all he wanted was to find a hole in the ground to hide in, or give him a rope to hang himself. Why didn't he think of that? If someone could even take care of Ying Fangzhou, why couldn't they take care of him? He had just gotten a father, and now he had gotten a grandmother. Furthermore, she was a super combat granny who could climb mountains of blades and descend into hell. She was capable of researching the elements of destruction and could be a violent archaeologist in hell. She had been all-powerful when she was alive, and even after she died, the entire world would mourn for her. There was no way to continue living. The only thing he could do now was to divert the old lady's attention and offer his senior as a scapegoat. Thinking of this, Huaisha took a big step back and pointed at his teammate next to him. He said in a loud voice, "Don't worry about me. Take a look. Senior Ying is injured. His blood is all over the ground." At the side, Ying Fangzhou, who had been silent from the beginning, stiffened and turned to glare at Huaisha. Then he heard Evelyn's voice. Is it little Ying?" The old lady raised her eyebrows slightly and scrutinized the gray-haired man in front of her. "You haven't spoken for so long. I thought you were a subject to be sent to a general anatomy class. What's wrong? You don't want to greet me?" After a short silence, Ying Fangzhou no longer had any arrogance. He bowed his head respectfully. "I'm just ashamed, Professor. Such a serious injury?" Chachel raised his hand and casually lifted Ying Fangzhou's clothes. He scrutinized the tragic traces below. "What happened? Did you bump into the muzzle of some ruler again?" "I was punched by the heretic king," Ying Fangzhou answered truthfully. "You guys from the Heavens Inquisition faction more or less have some problems with your brains. It's fine if you're just a support, but when you're hot-headed, you rely on your tough life to do whatever you want. The only one with a clear mind is a good-for-nothing who can't be helped up from top to bottom. You've never been a good person." The old lady stretched out her hand mercilessly and tore open the wound on Ying Fangzhou's chest. She observed the injuries inside. Finally, she coldly withdrew her finger and took out a handkerchief to wipe the blood. She said mercilessly, "If you can learn even one word of the cautiousness that I taught you back, then you won't die in front of me, your teacher." Ying Fangzhou lowered his head and nodded respectfully. Yes, seeing that he was being reprimanded by the old lady and did not dare to talk back, Huaisha could not help but cover his face and restrain himself from laughing out loud. Old Ying, you also have a day like this. Feel this pain." But before he could gloat for a while, he saw the old lady turn around and glance at him. "What are you laughing at? You're not much better. There's no difference between 1 or 2. Even if you bring them to class in the future, they can only be used as a negative example for the students. One died recklessly, the other died recklessly. None of them had a good ending. As a teacher, you might feel embarrassed and not even be willing to attend the funeral. Huaisher smiled stiffly and did not dare to speak. Even if he was beaten, he had to stand upright. Moreover, the old lady was right to teach him a lesson. Forget it. He's already dead. There's no need to make a fuss in front of the young people. Evelyn sighed and reached out to press on the wound on Ying Fangzhou's chest. I'll say the ugly words first. Other than first aid, the only thing I can use is a little bit of biological law. You'd better be prepared. Please do not worry. Ying Fangzhou nodded in response. No, what I mean is injuries are nothing to worry about. It's just that as a teacher's occupational disease, I always want the students to remember the lesson. So she thought for a moment and smiled. The process will be a little painful. At that moment, the painful education began. Ying Fangzhou suddenly widened his eyes. His body twitched violently, the veins on his face bulged, and his teeth cracked. He could not suppress the painful roar in his throat. He roared loudly. Blazing light burst out from his body and spread in the roar. The wandering electric light raged and swept through. It was difficult to control. The remaining supreme power in the wound lost its suppression and exploded. Just like that, in front of Huaisher, Ying Fangzhou's body exploded into a mist of blood. Not even a fingernail-sized fragment could be found. However, before he could react, he saw the surging blood mist rapidly shrinking inwards. Pale bones, nerve lines, wriggling blood vessels, and the outline of internal organs quickly appeared. In the end, a naked man knelt on the ground in the broken water sack, staggering and panting. His fingers trembled uncontrollably. However, the arm that was once torn apart was finally back. The big hole in his chest was also repaired and restored to a complete state. There were no internal injuries left. Behind the old lady, Huaisher's eyes twitched, and he felt a chill on his back. He just wanted to take a few breaths of oxygen and calm down. He had never seen such a violent treatment method. Since the injury caused by the heretic king was difficult to heal, he would completely detonate the power that was suppressed by Yun Zhongjuan in the wound. Then, before it killed Ying Fangzhou, he would take the first step and tear Ying Fangzhou into pieces. It would be like cutting him into pieces, leaving no room for destruction. After the supreme power dissipated, he would be put back together again through the framework of the Creator. He would also collect other tissues and cultivate the missing bones and internal organs. Anyway, as long as the soul was fine, this kind of damage was not a problem for Yun Zhongjuan. For a short time, you will be weak for a while. Lie down first. Chasha took out a set of clothes from her satchel and threw it over. Then she took out a folding chair and opened it before looking at Huaisher. Since we can appear here, it means that the gambling game has started again. The old lady asked, "Who is the chess player?" "It's me, Madame Chasha." The voice of the vice principal was heard. He suppressed his excitement and reported solemnly, "The 19th trial of the Sacred Heart. Isaac." From the divine Marrow series? Evelyn was slightly surprised. She nodded and said, "Kadia has mentioned you to me. I didn't expect that you would grow to this point so quickly." "I'm just relying on the seniors' help," the vice principal replied. "The only thing different from your godmother is your modesty." She shook her head and sighed. "Since you can appear here, it means that the celestial genealogy has begun to rebuild." The old lady looked at Huaisher and asked, "Who is in charge now?" "Russell." Huaisher answered without hesitation. Silence. In a short silence, the old lady seemed to be stunned. Even Ying Fangzhou, who was lying on the ground, suddenly sat up and raised his eyebrows. Who are you talking about? That candidate for the clerk?" Russell. Huaisha answered again. That's the guy, you know? This time, Evening Fangzhou was dumbfounded. He and Evelyn looked at each other. It felt as if after Oda Nobunaga came back to life, he sat cross-legged with Toyotomi Hideyoshi and discovered that in the end, it was Tokugawa Ieyasu who forced him to take over the world. They felt the pleasant surprise from fate. I always feel that life is full of setbacks and that the future is bleak. After a long time, the old lady sighed softly. I think this utopia is finished. To be honest, I think so too. Huaisha nodded frantically in agreement. If not for the fact that the conditions did not allow him to do so, he would have immediately started saying things like Russell is going against the flow and provoking complaints from the celestial genealogy, and the world is full of bitter old bastards. Then he would have returned to the two sages and returned to the ivory tower. When the time came, the old lady would be the master of the genealogy, and Olding would be the #1 tool. Everyone would rebuild the second utopia together. Wouldn't that be perfect? However, they probably would not take these jokes seriously. After lamenting for a short while about the fickleness of fate, the old lady did not care too much. Who initiated the bet? Evelyn finally asked, Li Qing? Marcus? Or Olaf? It's me. The hoarse voice of the diplomat came from outside the chessboard. It's good to see you, Professor Chatchel. You're actually still alive, Marcus. Evelyn was silent for a long time and sighed with pity. It's been so many years. It's been hard on you. It's just part of my job. Marcus replied, as if he was smiling. There's always a mission, Professor. Don't talk about missions to people who are still dragged out to work after death. Evelyn shook her head and sighed with emotion, but did not say anything else. After understanding the situation in detail, she began to organize the tools and reserves in her backpack. Soon, she finished counting, but she did not find any materials that she had previously stored. She could only get up from the chair and look around. Under the wind and sand, there was a pale and ancient skeleton. There were also small protrusions that had long been covered by layers of flowers and plants. Whose is this? She asked. It's quite unique. Huaisha raised his hand. Do you mind letting me use it? The old man asked. I need some materials. Do as you wish. Huaisha did not care. Do you need me to take off these things that are in the way? No need. This is fine. Evelyn lowered her eyes and stared at the grassland full of flowers and plants under her feet. She did not care about the poisonous powder spreading in the air. She just suddenly reached out and enveloped the dying rat man in the distance. She clenched her 5 fingers. At that moment, a faint light surged from the void and enveloped the entire area. The framework belonging to the Creator descended. Chapter 11:30. Looking at it with the naked eye, it was impossible to tell the difference between the changes. But in the eyes of the soul of the Ascended, all of this had undergone earth-shattering changes and reversals according to the will of the Creator. It was not a problem to call it a taste, an aura, or some other feeling. The key was that the space in the two places had become completely different. It was as if there was suddenly a patch of darkness in the red ink. A hole that led to the deepest part of the trench appeared in the blue ocean, and a ray of sunlight appeared in the pouring rain. The laws that were completely different from Gaia's laws were at work here. Then there was a miraculous phenomenon. In just a few seconds, countless grass and flowers rapidly shrank. It was as if time had reversed. The brilliant stage of blooming quickly went back and was no longer there. The vitality that overflowed within flowed and began to shrink. In some way that Huaisha could not understand, it returned to the dying rat man on the ground. Then, the rat man that had been beheaded by Huaisha let out a blood-curdling scream. The head that was severed on the ground quickly changed. It was like plasticine that had been flattened and molded as it was molded according to one's will. Sometimes it turned into the appearance of a kobold, and sometimes it turned into a middle-aged, shriveled face that resembled a human. Finally, it returned to its original state. The neck and body were once again connected together in an incredible manner. It floated in the air and spasmed violently under the operation of the laws within the framework. The stooped body began to expand. Tentacles, blisters, tumors, and mutations on the body constantly appeared and quickly disappeared. All abnormalities and byproducts were disintegrated under the stripping and suppression of the Creator. In this bizarre change, the rat man spasmed violently and suddenly raised its head. On its spasming face, there was a faint, magnificent color surging between its mouth and nose. A familiar aura spread out, making Huaishur come closer in disbelief and widen his eyes. The blood of Gaia! What is this? He pointed at the rat man and asked in a daze, "What's going on?" Of course, it's the theory of evolution. Evelyn's 5 fingers moved, slightly, precisely adjusting the laws of every place, controlling all the changes. She could still divert some of her attention to teach the ignorant juniors, so she had plenty of time to spare. "What do you think the framework is, Huaishur?" she suddenly asked. Huaishur was speechless for a moment, although he had some understanding of the relevant concepts. He suddenly realized that he didn't know how to give a precise definition. Creation mode for cheating? He answered tentatively. Although it's a little off, it's not too far off. Evelyn nodded and explained calmly. Scholars at the end of the day are people who operate and write laws. It's not a problem to be a programmer who maintains the reality system. After the passing of the gods, this was the new era of magicians. Learning laws, compiling laws, and modifying laws. Through the medium of reality, he could finally control the 4 seasons, regulate ocean currents, pacify earthquakes, and extinguish lava. However, success was limited by the present situation. Once he left the present situation, the effect of a single law would be greatly reduced, and he would even have to rely on other tools to operate. Under such circumstances, a framework that could replace the existence of the present situation and make the laws self-consistent in it was born. The so-called framework was made by imitating the structure of the present situation. It was a system that could operate independently even after leaving the present situation. Every creator had their own field of expertise. In the end, what was achieved was a unique system and framework. Not only that it could be called a domain or a creation mode. Whether its structure was complicated and precise or simple and straightforward, the framework itself was a modification tool made by countless laws under the main axis of the creator. Its only function was to modify reality. At this point, the old lady's smile became more and more amiable. As long as it was within the scope of its own specialty, it could be modified however it wanted. At that moment, the ratman's ear-piercing scream reached its peak. In that dilapidated and hunched body, a dazzling and magnificent light reappeared. Huaishur, what you saw was the reverse application of the theory of evolution. Evelyn said softly, the theory of degeneration. Now, the final degeneration had begun. Under the will of the Creator, the ratman's state reversed time and traced back to the past at a rapid speed. The new cells were rapidly shrinking, and the old cells were recovering from death. Version rewind. Forcefully rewind back to before it used the blood of Gaia. The magnificent brilliance of the blood of Gaia was finally completely extracted from its body and fell into Evelyn's hands. The moment it was completed, the rat man, who could not bear the burden, met its end after leaving the framework. It turned into ashes and disappeared without a trace. Huaishur was dumbfounded. Can it be done like this? He suddenly had a bold idea. Oh, I see. The essence of the miracles left behind by the old world. after a simple glance. The old lady had already analyzed the object in her hands thoroughly. It's not a problem to say that it's the blood of Gaia. It's also mixed with a derivative of the spirit marrow pillar. The pillar is a fragment stripped from the creation plan. After analyzing it, she glanced at Huai Shi. Don't look at it. Although the theory of degeneration can strip it out, in essence, this thing has already been used. The state is solidified, and there is no possibility of reconstruction. With that said, she tossed the blood of Gaia that had shrunk into a block in her hand. However, as a polymer of miracles like the crystal of wishes, it can still be used for the time being. After pondering for a moment, she raised her eyes again. She looked at Huai Shi. The look in her eyes was so subtle that it made Huai Shi feel a chill at the back of his head. The premonition of death suddenly jumped. Huai Shi, you should have other cards, right? Evelyn suddenly asked. Huh. Huai Shi was stunned. My legs are not good. After getting old, I'll pant after taking 2 steps. I always need a means of transportation. Evelyn said slowly, coincidentally, you're here. It saves me the trouble of finding other raw materials. When she said this, her eyes stared straight at Huai Shi. Her expression was so solemn. At the same time, it was meaningful. Just like the Bodhisattva in the TV series, standing on the cloud with a jade bottle, looking down at the sprite running out of her garage with a mysterious smile. At this point, there was no need to say more. Evil creature, why don't you show your true form? At that moment, Huai Shi finally understood what she meant. He subconsciously took 2 steps back, raised his hand, and tried to stop her. Wait, but just as he opened his mouth, the sound that came out of his mouth became a confused syllable. Woof. The familiar electronic accompaniment sounded involuntarily in his mind. Huai Shi felt his body rapidly expanding under the framework of the Lord of Creation. Layers of hair quickly grew from his skin without any resistance or discomfort. It evolved smoothly in the direction of hell. Under the blessing of theory of evolution, his appearance changed in an instant. And when the crystal in the hands of the Lord of Creation was thrown out, he involuntarily looked up to the sky and howled. In the familiar howl, he swallowed the crystal of Gaia's blood in one gulp. Then, dazzling electric light burst out from his limbs. The dazzling light spread, and the hair fell off, turning into hard black scales. When they rubbed against each other, sparks burst out. When the huge body expanded again, it cast the ferocious outline of the demonic dragon of the past on the ground. In the end, the behemoth with a body length of hundreds of meters opened its mouth and swallowed the bones of the giant snake next to it. The 2 sharp horns on the top of its head grew rapidly. Like a wolf and a dragon, the back of the majestic behemoth swelled, and the shadow of a huge pair of wings appeared faintly. They overlapped with each other and turned from illusion to reality, forming a huge light wheel. Now, the young man just now had turned into a behemoth that could swallow the sky and the earth. Huai Shi's beast, superevolution. With the blood of Gaia, the Lord of Creation cycle was summoned. Then, the Prince of Paradise, Huai Shi, was sacrificed, and this solidified miracle crystal was thrown in to complete the final summon. End behemoth, Bichimo's infant. At this moment, a bright golden light emerged from the surface of the card on the chessboard. The dual attributes of resources and creatures appeared unbelievably, and the attack and defense values began to skyrocket at a jaw-dropping speed. Just like a super-large war weapon, the behemoth that was comparable to a building roared at the sky above the card, and layers of lightning burst out. Everyone's eyelids twitched crazily at the sight of the 2 innate skills that were vague and vague. Death Devourer, all death is its food. Devouring hell creatures will allow the beast of heaven to grow. Life Devourer, All living things are sacrifices to the end behemoth. Consuming souls will allow the end behemoth's divinity to transform. In the end, all that was left was the description of the card, which was short and confusing. There were only 2 words. Holy. The majestic halo behind the behemoth once again resounded with familiar hymns and praises, vast and majestic, resounding throughout the world. And when the flowing light of the card once again descended from the sky, surging origin substances and miracles emerged from the halo of the behemoth, converging into one and condensing again to reforge a brand new physical body. All ages card commemorative pack. Pack sail to the stars of rotten dreams. Judge, descend here. And when Huai Shi returned again with the help of the second card, what he saw was the behemoth that was as large as a building lying on the ground, wagging its tongue and tail, flattering the creator. Is this reasonable? He scratched his head. Why didn't he know that he had this ability? It was a pity that Bichimos was ultimately a behemoth of hell created by the combined efforts of 2 creators, although it was the manifestation of Huai Shi's bestial nature, and manifested the changes after his solidification. Huai Shi's soul was still in a sublimated state and could not be completely transformed. He could only abandon the Prince of Paradise form and return with another card. Otherwise, wouldn't he be able to transform into a big monster again and continue to spit out happily? How else could it be said that having an old person at home was like having a treasure? The older the person, the more precious. Unlike Senior Ing, who was a golden thigh when it came to fighting, the moment old Lady Chachel appeared, the car and house were immediately settled. Now, under the command of the old lady, Ing Fangzhou had already begun to install the base of his celestial palace on the back of the behemoth. Soon, the projection of the majestic celestial palace appeared on the back of the behemoth. Boundless lightning rose. Layers of dark clouds gathered out of thin air, rain and thick fog fell, shrouding the behemoth's surroundings. With this as the foundation, a new cycle of the 4 seasons was formed. Thunder spread. Apart from the research on hell creatures and the theory of evolution, other things are not my area of expertise. Old Lady Chachel sighed. Apart from protecting this big guy, I'm afraid it's hard for me to be distracted in other aspects. Littling has no talent in other aspects apart from fighting. What do you plan to do next? Why sure? You still need to ask? Huai Shi lowered his head and looked at the markings on the map in his hand, as well as the dozens of strongholds that represented the Golden Dawn. Let's go and greet our acquaintances. He smiled at the chessboard and whispered softly, I miss them so much. Chapter 1131. Above the vast snowfield, thunder suddenly sounded in the distance. Countless mounds were covered in flying snow, like the gums of ferocious beasts, surrounding and protecting the castle that was shrouded in brilliant rainbow light. And under the snow-covered ground, countless root-like tissues spread out from the bottom of the castle. The alchemy array from the Golden Dawn was slowly growing, covering the land inch by inch, correcting the depth, changing the weather, and reshaping the universe, recreating the dead snowfield, little by little dragging it into hell. Those sharp ice crystals that grew from the ground gradually emerged dark projections. With the condensation of disaster, a large group of plants from hell were brewing in the countless ice beds. Occasionally, there would be precocious individuals that would suddenly open their blood-red eyes across the ice layer. They would look at this world. Then they would find that the amber world was also looking down at them. It even blinked. Curiosity appeared in its vertical pupils. Then a huge palm gently pressed down across the thick layer of ice. Its sharp claws popped out like blades, deeply embedded into the ice layer, cutting and crushing it. Finally, it raised its claws and licked the remaining ketchup on it twice. After spitting, the behemoth withdrew its gaze and continued to wag its tail and lick its tongue galloping happily in the snow, towards the distance. In the castle shrouded in rainbow light, between the layers of arrays of the arcane array, a thin figure suddenly appeared. Mr. Waite. Surrounded by the arcane array, the alchemist raised his eyes. It's rare to see you in such a hurry. Do you have any orders? Edward Waite was silent for a moment and sighed. Mr. G, I'm sorry to bring you bad news. This place is abandoned. Everyone must evacuate as soon as possible. I will assist you. What? Ji Shangu was slightly stunned and frowned. The zombie vesicles have just been planted, and we have to evacuate now. There are enemies coming. Edward sighed. We need to buy more time and mobilize the surrounding forces. Before that, we must avoid unnecessary losses. Who? Ji Shangu's mind turned quickly. The map of the surrounding area and the division of forces appeared in his mind. He found it hard to believe. 6 layers of Rashomon defense lines can't hold. Is Rome that fast? Not Rome. After a short pause, whether it was an illusion or not, Edward revealed an expression as if he had eaten **T. He said, it was why sure. For a moment, not only Ji Shangu but even Doppler, who had rushed over from the outer layer, was stunned. Due to the limited environment, they were unable to pay attention to the changes in the outside world. However, the last time they received news, it was when Alistair directly used the Heretic King to suppress the rising stars of celestial genealogy. Who would have thought that even the Heretic Monarch would be defeated? Please wait a moment. Ji Shangu nodded without hesitation and commanded his androids to start packing up all the experimental data and matrix data, as well as important instruments. As a new member of the Inner Circle after the fall of the Kingdom of Heaven, he had already reached the rank of the crown wearer in just a short dozen years after the solidification. He was given the honor of the Abyss Infant and was expected to advance to the Third Circle within 100 years and become the ruler. However, this did not mean that he would act recklessly, and it was impossible for him to be so arrogant that he was not afraid of anything. As an alchemist, he did not have the intention to wrestle with the sort of calamity of celestial genealogy. It was not shameful to run away, but it would be foolish to be chopped to death. There were already 2 Grand Masters who had died in his hands, and he did not need to add to the list. In less than 3 minutes, all the relics and important secret ritual cores that were scattered around the area had been collected into the bag. After abandoning the large group of people around them, Ji Shangu, Doppler, and the other solidifiers had already gathered in the atrium that was full of flying snow. In Edward's hand, the glow of the card appeared again. However, it was completely different from the vast majority of alchemy. After going deep into hell, the former members of the Kingdom of Heaven had already excavated and explored a completely different way of using alchemy from the Utopia. As the essence of alchemy gathered, a gray card appeared on his palm. The man in red held a double-headed scepter in his hand, and his crown had an emblem that represented infinity. He was showing a miracle to the witnesses in front of him. Following the reversal of the card surface, there was a faint outline of a monkey behind him, hinting at the secret hidden behind the miracle and the scam that no one knew about. Tarot card, magician, mystery, ingenuity, and even ingenuity and cunning, all kinds of meanings surged. And in the end, the solidified divinity turned into a solemn projection, holding the Mercury staff with 2 snakes entangled in it, and stepping on the flying boots. Hermes' divine power descended under the call of the secret instrument. In the blink of an eye, a straight path was opened up from the layers of snowstorm. At the end of the path that shone with rainbow light, the distant place that was isolated from the world was already close at hand. The moment they stepped on the path, their figures suddenly disappeared from the courtyard, turning into streams of light that flew into the distance. But At that moment, the flying snow that filled the sky suddenly stopped. A gloomy aura suddenly pressed down from the grayish-black sky, and the ice-cold aura that seemed to have substance turned into an iron clamp, causing the magician's teleportation to stop. Then, the dome shook violently. The heavenly drum burst forth, and the mighty thunder spread, shaking heaven and earth. Scorching pain. The tens of thousands of lightning bolts had already slashed down from the clouds. In an instant, they crossed a long distance and slashed down on the path of rainbow light. The tyrannical light spread, and the magician's phantom dissipated in an instant. Their figures were awkwardly squeezed out from the void, and then they saw the figure that blocked their path. Without any warning, he descended from the sky. "Where are you going?" Ing Fangzhou raised his eyes and coldly glanced at the enemy in front of him. In his arms, the hateful water spear rang loudly. Under the grip of that hand, the spear tip cut across the ground, drawing a straight line from the end of the line of sight to the other end. It was like an invisible iron wall that rose from the ground. "The battle between us hasn't started yet," he calmly ordered. "So, you have to go back." Edward frowned, and the tarot card projection in his hand appeared again. He raised his voice and questioned, "Ing Fangzhou, you?" Boom! Before his voice died away, the dazzling lightning bolts went straight forward. The soul-shaking thunder spread, tearing the air and ravaging everyone's eardrums. Yun Zhongjuan's lightning spear had already arrived. Or, let's just... Ing Fangzhou grinned and whispered in the ear of his enemy, "Die here." At that moment, Edward only had time to flip his hand, take out a golden cup, and throw it at the lightning bolts in front of him. The lightning bolts all over the sky turned into a waterfall and poured into the cup, but there was no overflow. It seemed to be bottomless. Then, the outline of a sword appeared in his hand. It was cast by the dazzling lightning bolts just now. He threw it at Ing Fangzhou, but it only provoked a sneer. The lightning bolts bombarded Ing Fangzhou's body, but they couldn't cause any damage. Then, the lightning bolts that had been purified 3 times appeared on the blade of the spear and stabbed out. Under that spear, Edward was vaporized into ashes without any resistance. But the moment just now had allowed him to be prepared. Soon, his body reappeared in the distance, but one of the tarot cards in his hand was missing. In just one move, the fool was destroyed. His expression became gloomy. "Do you think everyone will go easy on you? Old thing, don't be too presumptuous. Then come and kill me." Ing Fangzhou dragged the lightning spear and stepped forward step by step, not caring at all. His body, which was shrouded in layers of lightning, was difficult to see with the naked eye. But the ferocious smile on his face was so clear. "Let me see how much you trash have learned from hell." In the blink of an eye, lightning bolts fell from the sky. Yun Zhongjuan had turned into countless afterimages and rushed toward Edward. The brilliance of the Hermit, Temperance, and Star kept appearing one after another. At this moment, the world on the snowfield seemed to have suddenly turned upside down, and everyone felt a strange sense of weightlessness. Everything was separated from each other, and Edward's figure disappeared without a trace in an instant. When he reappeared, brilliant flames had already gushed out from his body. The battle between the solidifier and Yun Zhongjuan began in an instant. The terrifying aftermath swept across, and there was no place for the others to stay. But before that, a magnificent flash shrouded the rest of the people, wrapped them up, and flew back to the castle again. In the dead silence, everyone looked at each other. Even if it was just a short moment, the killing intent from Yun Zhongjuan was like a knife deeply piercing into their souls, making everyone tremble involuntarily. The hatred and ferocity that almost condensed into a substance. Which side is the solidifier? Ji Shangu covered his face. Cold sweat flowed silently between his twitching fingers. It was not only fear and Yun Zhongjuan's destruction, but also the feedback from the array. Outside the castle, a ferocious outline gradually emerged in the wind and snow. The earth was rumbling under the trampling of a behemoth. A solemn light wheel lit up in the layers of wind and snow, and a mighty hymn played between the frozen world. The enemy was close at hand. At that moment, the solidifier looked at each other, and the ferocity and hostility from hell appeared in their eyes. They would never sit and wait for death. Awaken the giant elephant. Ji Shanggu clenched his fists and squeezed out a voice from his throat. They want war. Then give them war. The array roared, and the disaster created in the furnace roared. It condensed and took shape in the wind and snow. Didn't we agree to go into the dungeon together? On top of Bichimo's head, Huaisher looked at the clouds that kept falling in the distance and sighed helplessly. Why did you go up and start the fight alone? Although he complained, he still understood Fangzhou. Seeing that Golden Dawn was about to run away in front of his eyes, it would be strange if he could sit still. At this moment, the castle in the wind and snow was close at hand. Under the rustling snow, ghouls broke out of their vesicles one after another, quickly burrowing out. They hissed hungrily, and under the command of the horn, they gathered into an endless tide, surging towards the attackers. On top of the behemoth, Huaisher whistled, raised his hand, and patted Lousy Dog's head. Come on, give them the job. The behemoth shook its head in dissatisfaction. Unable to get rid of this annoying guy, it rolled its eyes. Then Bichimos took a deep breath. Chapter 1132. The icy snowfield fell into a terrifying silence at that moment. The wind was calm, and the waves were calm. The snow fell without a sound. Only the distant and deep sound of the wind was left in the vast and mighty world bursting out from the giant beast's lungs. Just like that, it calmly, greedily, and endlessly inhaled until the snow that filled the sky was disturbed. Suddenly, a high temperature rose from the giant beast's body, melting the ice and evaporating the snow powder. It burned fiercely like a furnace. The long breath had reached its end. A playful and expectant smile appeared on the ferocious beast's face. Just like that, it opened its mouth towards the endless ghouls before it. It gently spat out the essence of destruction. Flames, hurricanes, molten steel, and even berserk plasma, all kinds of destruction converged into one and gushed out from Bichimo's mouth. A sort of blazing light appeared out of thin air. As Bichimo's neck swayed, it tyrannically sprinkled across the world. It swept, slashed, shook, burned the earth, dissolved the ghouls, and shrouded the entire castle in a vast and mighty destruction. In the end, it soared into the sky and shattered the eternal ice and snow, revealing the light of the heavens. The afterglow of the setting sun sprinkled down and reflected on the magnificent halo. It refracted magnificent rainbow-colored light, illuminating the dark and cold mortal world. Bichimos was now marching on the burning earth, with its head held high. It forcibly took on the countless cannonballs, curses, and blazing lights that flew out from the castle. Those insignificant attacks merely burned 2 strands of its hair. When it took another deep breath, all the charred ghouls trembled violently. The pitch-black precipitate of hell and the embryonic form of calamity were extracted from their remains, converging into wisps of dark mist and plunging into the bottomless mouth. In the end, the devout sacrifice made up of countless deaths was exchanged for a gentle sigh of contentment. Burp, the giant beast flicked its tongue and looked back at the castle that was close at hand. Ji Shanggu's vision went dark when the giant beast truly stepped into the range of the alchemy array, and its greed fell on him. The alchemist of the Golden Dawn felt a bone-deep fear. Unlike the hesitation and panic brought by Cloud Lord, It was pure greed that seemed to have sprouted from the abyss. It was hungry and cruel, wanting to devour and destroy everything. It caused all living creatures to tremble in fear. Rancher, even though they looked similar, his opponent this time was completely different from the rancher's Miracle. Speaking of which, this life force that could grow without limit through devouring was more similar to the life force of the eternal beast. But beneath the two entirely different elements of destruction, there was something even more deadly hidden, an essence that terrified alchemists. But now, he had no time to think about anything else. The moment he came back to his senses, he no longer dared to slack off. He activated the secret device buried deep under the castle, and the alchemy array that covered the entire snowfield began to shrink. Abandoning all the corpse ghost vesicles that had been planted, the countless roots contracted and curled together, then suddenly extended, activating and awakening all the secret devices buried in the surroundings. All of his origin substance reserves were instantly emptied. What replaced it was a deep tremor that burst forth from beneath the earth. Around the castle, the countless mounds of varying heights began to sway. The melted snow was shaken off, breaking the layer of ice. The colossi that had been preheating for a long time finally propped up their bodies that were hundreds of meters tall. Amidst the deep rumbling of the rubbing of the boulders, the silhouettes that resembled giant bulls, birds, and even incomplete human figures squirmed. Accompanied by the tremor of the origin substance, they let out ear-piercing and mournful roars. It was like the cry of a dying man. Beneath Bichimo's head, Huaisher fell into a daze. He actually felt a tremor coming from the Book of Destiny. It was a reaction that belonged to the records of events. There were actually records of the kingdom of heaven around him. But when he surveyed the entire snowfield and gazed into the distance, he was unable to catch a glimpse of the brilliance of any of the books. Only the colossi of ice and stone that were so huge that it was suffocating were rapidly rising from the ground. Their scarlet eyes moved about their bodies and finally locked onto the enemy. There was absolutely no need for Huaisher orders and urging. Bichimos had already launched an attack of its own accord. The gigantic beast that carried the heavenly palace opened its mouth and hissed. Once again, it spewed out a stream of flame that engulfed the short colossus at the front. The surging steam of steel brought about a cutting ability that was even more terrifying than a chainsaw. It easily tore apart its ice shell and stone skin, revealing layers upon layers of alchemy arrays underneath. Even the core of the arrays. That was a tattered page of a book. This was the fragment that the Book of Destiny had sensed, a genuine fragment. Using the remains of the records of spirits as a foundation, it bestowed intelligence and power to the dead. Everything that could be seen was the final miracle formed by the fragments that could no longer be used when the kingdom of heaven had fallen. And what one could hear were the mournful cries of countless dying spirits. It was as though the organs of the dying had been plucked out and soaked in life-saving pods to maintain their vitality. To actually be able to utilize the remains and wastes that had lost their value to such an extent was truly breathtaking. It also caused Huaisher to be unable to restrain his killing intent any longer. Bichimos, kill them, the Inquisitor ordered coldly. Under his feet, the gigantic beast lifted its eyes. Countless teeth reflected the cold gleam of steel in its huge mouth. In an instant, the earth quaked and the mountains swayed. Amidst the deafening sound of breaking air, Bichimos finished accumulating power without warning. Its huge body that was as large as a building charged forward, setting off a hurricane. You step. Immediately after, it brazenly collided with the Colossus, causing the short mountain range to tremble and fall backwards. Under the bombardment and ravaging of the drummer, it cracked inch by inch. There was no mercy at all. Aiming at the core of the alchemy array, The tattered page that was wailing in grief opened its mouth and spat out. In the rising flames, the record that had been suffering for so long was finally burned to ashes. But there were even more colossi that surrounded it with no regard for their own safety. They grabbed, tore, or slashed at it. Dazzling rays of light constantly spurted out from their eyes, leaving burn marks on the armor-like scales. But the rumbling of the collapse never stopped. Just like that, the greedy Tautai that opened its mouth would swallow and burn everything into ashes, even if it was a thick ice shell or iron stone that fell into its mouth. Bichimos roared at the top of its lungs. In the castle, a stern look appeared on Ji Shanga's face. In his hand, a pitch-black ancient book appeared. It was a condensed soul formed from the records of events that had been collected in the underworld. It recorded the enormous and terrifying creatures created by the condensation of countless calamities, as well as the bizarre existences that would only appear in imagination, as well as the true essence of the decay of all things. The secret of the worm. The moment the book appeared, Ji Shangu did not hesitate to dig out one of his eyes and put half of his soul into it. On the cover of the book, the face that resembled a human face devoured the soul and body of the contestant. Then it opened its mouth, opened its bloodshot eyes, and roared at the top of its lungs. Wherever the roar passed, cracks would appear on the bodies of the colossi. In the incomplete records, wriggling ink stains would bulge out from the fragments, forming translucent worms of origin. Born by absorbing corruption and pain, the moment the worms of the book were born, they opened their mouths hungrily and extended towards Bichimos and Huaishur. This won't do. The colossi and worms of the book can only buy us some time. In the castle, behind Ji Shangu, Doppler had already pulled out a sharp blade from the shadows. He squeezed out a voice from between his teeth. "Send me up there. Let me kill him." According to Alistair's analysis, all of Huaishur's summoned creatures were related to the Book of Destiny. Once they lost the connection brought by Huaishur with the Book of Destiny, they would be nothing more than water without a source, a tree without roots. They would not be a threat at all. If they could kill Huaishur once here, it wouldn't matter even if they had to give up the entire stronghold. Moreover, before that, they were already prepared to perish together with Leylin. Ji Shangu nodded without the slightest hesitation. The secret ritual beneath his feet changed again. The shadow door that appeared in a flash rapidly took shape in midair. However, it was at that very moment that both of their expressions suddenly turned sluggish. They felt an intense pain bursting out from the depths of their souls. It was as if he had been struck in the head by an invisible axe. Their expressions convulsed, and their eyes widened. Their dim vision was filled with blood. 2 streams of blood tears slowly flowed down their faces. What the hell? Ji Shangu roared hoarsely and subconsciously turned his head around. He saw that outside the window of the castle, separated by the fluttering snow, under the siege of those berserk colossi and worms of the book, there was a figure looking towards them. It was right above Bichimos' head. Huaishur, be careful. Ji Shanga's eyes widened. However, it was already too late. The moment Bichimos rushed to the edge of the castle, Huaishur had already sensed it. Separated by layers of defenses and obstructions, several incomparably distinct auras, and the symbol that appeared above their heads. Black letter. It was an order to kill that was once issued by the Astronomy Club. It was a document to clean up solidified individuals and criminals. This was the inherent skill that Huaishur's judge card carried. Once he entered the battlefield, all opponents who had received the black letter from the Astronomy Club would be forcibly deducted 1 drop of HP, and their defense would be weakened. The moment the judge arrived at the surrounding area of the castle, the judgment from the present realm would once again appear from the distant past, marking the position of the enemy. Under the will of the judge, punishment would be meted out. Now, their judgment was looking at them. "Hello, everyone." Weisher smiled and greeted them gently. "Please open the door. The express delivery has arrived." He raised his hand and pulled the trigger. Super mini judgment device, Lord of the Flies, activated. Immediately after, a dazzling light spurted out from the muzzle. It pierced through the colossi that were close at hand, tore apart the stinky worms, crossed a long distance in the snowstorm, and destroyed all the insignificant defenses. Finally, it entered the castle and exploded with a loud bang. This was the final scene that the solidified individuals saw at that moment. Death had arrived, accompanied by the roar and loud noise of the castle's collapse. The raging thunder in the distance gradually dissipated and extinguished. Above the snowfield that was gradually returning to silence, a layer of fog had unknowingly risen. The thick paleness danced between the snow and ice, completely obscuring everything. Only the blood-curdling chewing sound could be heard from within. Soon, as the chewing sound dissipated, the curtain-like fog also disappeared into the distance. What was left in place was only the huge pit that was gradually covered by the snowstorm, announcing to all the observers the fate of the traitors. The trial that was 70 years late had just begun. Chapter 1133. On the land occupied by the abyss, in the domain of hell created by countless disasters, the Xingqiue territory set up by the fallen nation was engulfed by a sudden deep and thick fog, and none of the solidified people who dared to step into the wandering fog returned safely. Only the dwarf hunter known as the Thunder Tide escaped the thick fog through the rift and conveyed the destruction of the Xingqiue to the rulers. The ultimate behemoth, created by the people of the present state, was thrown into this battlefield. Enough! In the dark palace, the hoarse and low voice was interrupted by impatient words. In the dim light, everyone's expression was unsightly. The emissary of the eye of obscurity glanced at Alistair. "That's enough. Do you want to add a voiceover like how the people of the present state play games? It's just to liven up the atmosphere." Alistair sat on a high chair, holding his chin and smiling. His other hand was still holding the paused remote control. "Recently, I've been trying to think from the perspective of my opponent. Other than learning some bad habits, I've also gained something." "Puffed. The strange," I sneered with obvious disdain. "What did you gain this time?" "Ha, if you want to say it, you can only come to the conclusion that we will never be able to understand each other, right?" Alistair smiled coldly, lowered his eyes, and looked down at the projection under his feet. In the three-dimensional projection that gradually reflected the entire interior of the Gaia fragment, in the darkness created by countless hells, there was a quiet white fog dancing on the ground. But even the white fog that covered thousands of miles could not hide the reverberating roar. The vibrations transmitted by the ground were like ripples slowly spreading out from under the fog, revealing the terrifying things hidden within to the outside world. The thick fog gushed out endlessly from within. Wherever the white mist passed, everything returned to silence and deathly stillness. Once swallowed by the white mist, all the fortresses and large groups built in it would silently disappear. It was as if they had evaporated. Not even a drop of blood or a bone was left behind. The monster that was grinding its teeth and sucking its blood was hiding among them. It used the spreading white mist as its hiding place and wandered between hell, devouring and gluttoning to its heart's content. At this moment, in the hall that was isolated from the world, the participants who were projected here saw this scene again, and their expressions became increasingly gloomy. Who would like this kind of unexpected disaster? In less than 3 days, bad news came from the rear that should have been safe and sound. He had been robbed. the large group of people in hell, and the solidified ones were squatting at home, eating hot pot and singing songs. In the end, they were robbed by celestial genealogy. Not only did they rob them of their money and their bodies, they didn't even have a complete corpse. Even the cursed sea poison spring that gloomy eye had painstakingly cultivated had been emptied, especially since the guy who broke through the void gate was someone who could eat and take. If he couldn't take anything away, he would smash it into dust. Furthermore, his appetite was extremely good, and he didn't care about food or cold. Wherever they passed, not to mention the warehouses and fortresses of hell, even the stones on the floor were scraped off. Even the plants in the flower pots were not spared. Damn it, just a moment of carelessness. And such a big thing had happened. In less than a few days, the pebbles that were originally rubbing their feet had turned into scars. They were itchy, painful, and useless when scratched. When pinched for a long time, there was no effect, but it was definitely so sore that it made people want to cry. For the current participants, the losses of these few days were not painful enough, but the problem was it was too annoying. It was just like the mosquitoes buzzing in the mosquito net. How could it be so annoying? Now, those wild ghosts and remnants of celestial genealogy were about to seriously affect the construction and operation of the various systems in hell. According to the estimates of the jesters, based on the growth rate of Weischer's group, if they were allowed to continue, the itch that was difficult to get rid of now would probably evolve into endless pain in a few days. When that time came, it would really become a huge problem. Especially in the past 2 days, the situation at the front line had begun to become more and more critical. After a short period of rest and development, the group of ascendants in the present realm began to push forward crazily as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Especially on the side of East Xia. After Fusang rose into the sky, the support from Emperor Qing had already covered the entire battlefield. Coupled with the unkillable Quafu, it was simply a nightmare. Now, there was a large group of people sharpening their swords in front, and there was a guy at the back who had bad intentions and wanted to find a chance to ruthlessly kick your ass. No matter who it was, they would definitely curse. What the F*CK was Golden Dawn doing? Still touching. Now, the projections that descended here, in addition to communicating the situation and discussing countermeasures, their biggest purpose was to denounce Golden Dawn. That's not how it works, right? Alistair spread out his hands. You can't say that after you accepted the support and assistance we sent these days without blinking, you turned around and said that we didn't do anything. Didn't we participate in the creation of the blood and bone relay of the fallen country? Did the storm totems in the thunder see fall from the sky? It's fine if you like to play with your own dark eye, but didn't the Eternal Age group use our fixed ladder? Why didn't Paradise say anything? From the beginning until now, weren't you the only ones who didn't achieve anything? In the projection, the minister of the Eternal Age group, who was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, pushed up his glasses and said calmly, "No one denies Golden Dawn's contribution, but ultimately, the reason why things have turned out this way is because you didn't do anything right. Let's not talk about the loss of the Heretic King. These days, Arthur and Bremeng were seriously injured, and Edward died, as well as the destruction of the 6 empty territories. Our efforts are obvious to all." Alistair glanced at him and replied coldly, "If someone thinks that we can't do it, we don't mind someone showing us a talent that far surpasses ours." His meaning was obvious. If you say that I can't do it, then why don't you do it? Sai, of course, we don't have any doubts about you. The minister of the Eternal Age group smiled helplessly and acted as a peacemaker. Now, we just want to discuss and come up with a plan. We can't possibly make everyone restless because of such a small problem, right? The others didn't say anything and couldn't be bothered to respond. Good fellow, you're the one who's condemning us, and you're the one who's being reasonable. You've said all the good and bad things, yet you're acting like you're in a company meeting? Behind Alistair, at the door, Woodman leaned against the door frame and watched the commotion with a smile. He didn't say a word from beginning to end. He just watched coldly from the sidelines. At this time, the difference between hell and the present realm was obvious. Of course, once problems arose, such quarrels would be even more unavoidable. No one wanted to be the scapegoat, and similarly, they all had their own thoughts and plans. But no matter how chaotic the present realm was, there was still the Astronomy Association above their heads. Under the 3 major blockades, all their efforts were directed towards one direction. Even if the situation was against the wind and all 3 paths were pushed through, as long as they could find an opportunity, there was still a possibility of a comeback. On the other hand, in the Abyss camp, everyone was a ruler, a king of hell, and even had the element of destruction. Who would listen to who? You want to build the Bone Dome. I want to send down the power of God. Eye of Obscurity wants to assimilate and reshape all things. And the Eternal Age group is planning to monopolize everything. Doesn't Golden Dawn have their own plans too? Although no one would have any internal strife over this, it was inevitable to shift the blame, which was meaningless garbage time. Fortunately, after shifting the blame, they had to face reality. Then, no one was willing to speak. Only Woodman's cold laughter echoed outside the door. No matter how difficult it is on the chessboard today, isn't it still a chess piece? The representative from Eye of Obscurity asked impatiently, "Let's just be straightforward and spend some capital. Can't we just kill it with a curse?" Curse? That's a really good idea. Why didn't I think of that? Woodman couldn't help but clap vigorously and nod in agreement. Such a good idea. Why don't we try it? The undisguised mockery in his words caused the shadows that formed the leader's body to begin to fluctuate, faintly showing anger and coldness. But at least it was a relatively cost-effective method. At least there was no need to mobilize a large number of people. So be it if they had to spend some capital. Soon, an old alchemist who had been solidified for hundreds of years took on the heavy responsibility. Known as the insect breeder, the solidifier had studied curses and origin substance pollution for many years and was very famous in hell. Ever since he met Eye of Obscurity and received the ruler's guidance and grace, he was reborn from dissolution and was one of the top existences among the crowns. The secret ritual was completed, and the medium collected by Golden Dawn was sent over with an entire group as sacrifice and sacrifice. Then there was no then. Under everyone's gaze, less than half a minute after the curse was cast, the insect breeder began to roll on the ground, screaming ear-piercingly. The bones all over his body were ravaged by an invisible force and shattered inch by inch. Even the replacement puppets all over his body were of no use. They could only watch as the puppets began to spontaneously combust out of thin air. In the end, as if they had been doused with gasoline, they were engulfed together with the cursed. Sun, sun. In the fire, the insect breeder suddenly revealed a strange smile and screamed excitedly, "I see the sun burning. I'm also burning." Just like that, he abruptly burned to ashes. A gentle breeze blew, and the ashes rustled. It was chilling. Not only in this world, but even outside the chessboard, the insect breeder, who had returned to hell, did not leave behind any decent information or news. His soul, body, and all his treasures and workshops were burned to nothingness in the spreading flames the moment the curse breeder returned. Only the flying ashes echoed in front of the participants, as if they were mocking him. Not only the others, but even Woodman, who was watching the show, widened his eyes, feeling that this was unprecedentedly ridiculous. Was this too exaggerated? Was this still Yin Zhongjuan? Could it be that Huaisher, that little bastard, was actually the same as the old bastard? That she had secretly advanced into the Cloud Lord realm and was holding back a bellyful of bad farts to give them a traditional art show? Fortunately, there was no such possibility. The signs of Dong Jun's advancement were too obvious. They could be seen even at the bottom of the abyss, and there was no way to hide it. But who knew what kind of medicine Russell had fed him in just a few months? Judging by the pure qualitative change in his soul, Dong Jun's advancement was already set in stone. He was just one step away. Even if he was born to be a firewood, he could not be this fast, right? Or Alistair slowly frowned. When he and Woodman looked at each other, they could feel the coldness in each other's eyes. Was there an important factor behind why sure that they did not know about? Chapter 1134. This sudden speculation made the two of them feel uneasy for a long time. But other than Russell, who else was behind why sure? God. Which God? It couldn't be the one taken away by Golden Dawn, right? Mamakiria, or a specimen in the Continuation Academy. But if the gods were active again, the Land of Dreams should be able to see the signs through the changes in the Pillar of Spirit. Or was it the group of living corpses of the pioneers? It couldn't be the element of destruction hiding behind the scenes, right? Countless possibilities emerged in his mind, but they were quickly denied. But when his thoughts wandered to the end of countless hypotheses, Woodman couldn't help but frown. This kind of speculation that could only rely on groundless speculation, this kind of unfounded familiarity, and this feeling of being deliberately led, it was as if he could hear Loki's sharp laughter hidden behind the scenes. Damn it! His originally calm emotions gradually began to become restless, uncontrollable anger. Once that old bastard was involved, it began to become a pain in the ass. Who knew if this was a smokescreen released by Loki to deliberately mislead them and disturb their minds and thoughts? But at the same time, it was impossible to tell. What if this was an empty fort strategy to beat Loki at his own game? It was difficult to distinguish between truth and falsehood. As long as Loki was still alive, all information and news related to him could not be easily trusted. If they wanted to fully support him, they could only respond step by step based on the current objective situation. Other than that, all guesses would only lead to the worst result, because from the moment they began to think about the future, they might have already jumped into a trap. But no matter what, Huaishi's importance and threat had to be raised by another level. He was even more troublesome than Vice Principal Isaac. They couldn't let this guy stay here and be a hindrance. As you can see, the threat of Huaishi and the utopia he represents is far more than that. Alistair was the first to speak. If we want to solve the problem, I'm afraid we can't rely on something as simple as spells. We need to treat this more seriously. We, the tax official of the fallen country, sneered and did not give face at all. You want others to clean up the mess caused by Golden Dawn? Without you guys, things would be easier. But without Golden Dawn, wouldn't everyone have to face utopia? Woodman sneered and retorted without even raising his eyelids. If you ask me, what you're facing now is not the mythical lineup of the utopia 70 years ago, but a group of homeless ghosts. It's only right that you thank us. However, if we continue to let it go, it might not end up like this. The sinister chill in his words caused the entire hall to fall silent for a moment. With Woodman's reminder, the rulers of hell seemed to have seen a giant monster crawling over the city walls. Once again, he recalled the shadow and humiliation created by the Republic. Right now, there are only two people, the creator of cycles and Yun Zhongjuan. One of them is a scholar, while the other isn't even a Tier 5. Yet, they're already a huge threat to us. Alistair calmly added, if we give him a little more time and let him call out a few more people such as Osiris, Black God, White God, Heimdall Nuada, I don't need to remind you of what will happen then, do I? Without waiting for the others to express their opinions, he took the lead and said, under the premise of not delaying the construction of the stairway to heaven, we will send out the heretic monarch, Woodman, and Bennett. However, if he still has any other trump cards hidden, we might not be able to catch all of them in one fell swoop. At that time, no matter what the consequences are, Golden Dawn will not care anymore. As soon as he said this, the expressions of everyone in the hall changed one after another. They were cautious, puzzled, or angry. Or, rather, they were the former Utopia. Their attitude of, I'm all in, you guys can do whatever you want was no different from their arrogant attitude in the past. However, this time, the deceased tax official, who had been staying out of the meeting just now, spoke first. The fallen country will send out the Wild Hunting Legion to assist your plan. In addition, that lord is also interested in one of the targets. The tax official, who looked like a mummy, raised his empty eyes and warned, I hope you don't fail to appreciate our kindness and snatch that lord's prey without permission. Immediately after, the priest of the rancher said, a saint will cooperate with your operation, but that giant beast will be left for us to deal with. The Sea of Thunder will temporarily awaken the storm totem for you. The dwarf king coldly tossed the exquisite metallized skull at the tip of his finger. If there is a valuable prey, we will not hesitate to take action. We will do the same. The jester agreed with a hoarse voice. Soon, in the dark hall, the rulers reached a consensus once again. Before the real war began, they had to get rid of this scourge that was wandering among their trusted subordinates. However, even though they had decided on a general strategy, before the war began, they were still arguing endlessly over the distribution and disposal of the spoils of war. Woodman rolled his eyes and did not want to waste any more time. However, before he left, he saw the scene in the deepest part of the hall. In that secluded darkness, Alistair's expression was, there was no excitement or fanaticism. It was as if he was a statue that was not involved in the matter. It was so calm. TSK. Woodman frowned slightly and turned to leave. Under the gloomy sky, the earth rumbled. The fog seemed to be surging endlessly, spreading to the ends of the world. It was difficult to see the ferocious aura hidden within. Only the traces of scarlet that could not be dispersed, lingering in the fog, could show the ferociousness of the giant beast. Bichimos moved forward amidst the loud rumbling that shook the earth. Ever since Lord Yun Zhongjuan created the screen, the giant beast had become like a ghost, difficult to predict its movements. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of chewing when it was eating. It made one's scalp go numb. Oh my, I'm only a few minutes late, but it seems like a huge piece of someone's backyard has been dug out. Woodman laughed strangely and glanced at the gloomy dwarf king, not bothering to hide his ridicule. The dwarf king snorted coldly and crushed the metallized skull in his hand. He raised his skinny and slender hand and grabbed at the fog in the projection. In the distance, a storm suddenly howled. Amidst the rumbling of thunder, a wave suddenly emerged above the thick fog. Under the will of the dwarf king, the power of the storm totem crossed a long distance and suddenly descended. It caused the fog to tremble violently under the ravaging of an invisible hand, like a blanket. A tidal wave was set off. Then the fog collapsed. Under the attack of the storm, the fog that had spread for hundreds of kilometers produced a sound similar to that of silk being torn apart. Cracks appeared in the middle of the fog, dancing and quickly dissipating. On the ground, Bichimos raised its beastly face. Strands of lightning flickered on its horns. In just a few hours, the monster had grown even stronger. Their appearance was even more exaggerated than the blessed teeth under the rancher's command. In less than a few minutes, More than half of the watchtower in the center of the fog had disappeared in the mouth of the greedy Tao-Tai. The remaining watchtower was still supporting its body with great difficulty and had yet to collapse. A gust of wind blew past, under the overlooking gaze of the rulers. A sound similar to that of crying could be heard. But what made everyone even more astonished was that the gigantic beast seemed to have sensed the danger descending from the sky. Before that, it decisively abandoned the food it had not finished eating and ran away. Moreover, compared to the trembling of the earth and mountains in the past, there was not even the slightest sound of footsteps when it ran away. Its speed was also ridiculously fast. That clumsy appearance it usually had was simply an act to fool people. If the Dwarf King's reaction was just a little bit slower, perhaps that fellow would have escaped from the encirclement, but now it was already too late. The moment everything was exposed to the sunlight, a dazzling radiance suddenly appeared in the sky. The Saint of Hell from the blessed lands descended from the sky like a meteor. Countless gorgeous jewels were wrapped around his skeletal arms. They swayed in the wind, and the pearls embedded in his skull shone brightly. A solemn melody praising the god of hell was played under the will of the saint, forcefully suppressing the noise in the light wheel. Only this voice that belonged to the true God was left in the world. There was no room left for why sure to use. Following that, the earth trembled. Countless dust particles rose from the cracks in the ground. Under the call of the pious hymn, pale skeletal hands suddenly reached out from the cracks in the ground and climbed up. Countless skeletal hands piled up, forming a strange spectacle that stretched as far as the eye could see. That was the sacrifice of countless fanatics who had sacrificed themselves for the cause. Countless skeletons piled up to form an iron wall that could not be crossed. It was the wall of believers that completely sealed off the domain within a radius of tens of kilometers. Without waiting for the Saint of Hell to do anything, the calamities of the jesters surged in the sky. Cold, dark green flames appeared in the empty air. Invisible flames. Although they appeared to be flames, the flame-like shadows were actually distorted vortexes formed from matter that had deepened substantially in a short period of time. Once contaminated, even the ascended would not be able to avoid the distortion of the body and soul. Assassins. The endless flames connected with each other and covered the sky. After isolating Cloud Lord from the cycle of heaven and earth, they turned into a lid that covered the top of the wall of believers. Deep underground, the worms of the eye of darkness stirred the magma in a frenzy and shuttled rapidly. The sky, the earth, and even the surroundings were sealed within in an instant. In this small box, there was only prey that had nowhere to run. The time for the hunt had come. Right in front of Bichimos, a pale, frosty wind swept past. The mighty roar of galloping war horses spread out from within. Wild Hunt. The Wild Hunt Corps from the fallen kingdom advanced forward in a mighty manner like a tidal wave. The tens of thousands of soldiers worked together as if they were one entity. When the earth wailed under the iron hooves, the entire world seemed to be on the verge of collapse as it trembled. But at this moment, a disdainful snort rang out. Between the behemoth and the core, a mournful lightning suddenly burst forth. A blurry figure slowly walked out from it. Holding a long weapon in his hand, he looked disdainfully at the formation in front of him. At that moment, on the solemn golden chariot, the demon from Sumer raised his scarlet eyes. Ing, Fong, Zhou. Gala clenched the sharp blade in his hand and roared loudly. Indescribable ecstasy and unprecedented killing intent emerged from that pair of eyes at the same time. It was difficult to distinguish whether it was anger or joy. The enemy was clearly in front of him, but that figure did not seem to have heard him. He did not even raise his head to look at him. Such a contemptuous attitude, and such a familiar sense of humiliation made Gala's smile even more ferocious. Then, without waiting for the corps behind him, he stepped on the surging waves of blood and galloped forward in an instant. A fishy wind blew in his face. Die! The demon laughed shrilly and slashed down with the golden sword. Bang! At that moment, in the dissipating lightning, the burly figure finally raised his head. But that face illuminated by the sparks made Gala instantly stunned. Huh, are you calling me? Quafu asked blankly, but my surname is not Ing. Finally, a familiar voice came from behind Gala. Are you looking for me? Yun Zhongjuan asked in a cold voice. Then, the hateful water roared, and the purified lightning soared into the sky. It surged and left a deep cut on the sky full of flames. It pierced through. Light fell from the sky behind the crack, illuminating the outline of the behemoth. And on Bichimos's back, there were a few figures who should never have appeared here. East Xia, Rome, Russian Federation, India, America. Every face was completely different. The only thing they had in common was the pure source substance that was constantly surging in their bodies, as well as the iron-like killing intent. Level 5, level 5, level 5, and more level 5. They were all F*King level 5. At that moment, all the participating rulers could not help but feel their vision go dark. F*CK. Chapter 1135. As long as one was alive, regardless of whether it was a human or a monster, there would always be a period of time where one would start to think about the meaning of life, the universe, and the world under the sudden blow of reality. It was just like the time of a sage. Just like now, not only all the rulers participating in the war, but even the hell chess players outside the world fell into a daze. They started to think, who am I? Where am I? Where am I going? And most importantly, what the F*CK is going on. Why are there so many F*King 5th grade existences here? Quafu of East Xia, Turul of the Holy Spirit of the Russian Federation, Traltakutli and Sepedatek of the Americas, Agni of India. Unknowingly, almost all the 5th grade existences who entered the fragment had gathered here. That damned thick fog was not there to help the behemoths hide their tracks at all. Even Bichimos was nothing more than a distraction to attract attention. Everything that was done behind the scenes was to quietly complete the gathering of power, allowing the 5 fingers from the present realm to pinch together. Behind the concealment of the curtain, they clenched their fists. Hunting? No war. The war had begun. 2 days ago, above the collapsed castle, snowflakes fell endlessly, fluttering in the wind, gradually covering the cold corpses. Amidst the chewing sounds that sounded like a landslide, Huaishur sat on the collapsed ruins, quietly looking into the distance. The iron piece that he picked up casually spun on his fingertips. It was just a habitual action when he was thinking. When he returned to reality from his thoughts, the thunder in the distance had come to an end. Yun Zhongjuan, covered in blood, returned. Seeing Huaishur's expectant gaze, he snorted unhappily. His hands were empty. He did not bring back anything. Where's Edward? Huaishur was stunned. Killed, Ing Fangzhou replied. That guy has too many trump cards. If he's alive, there will be endless trouble. It's not good to hold back. While he's weak, we should kill him if we can. Not a single usable one was left. Huaishur sighed, regretting that he didn't leave anyone alive. It couldn't be helped. Golden Dawn was indeed the Golden Dawn. The position of her neck and head were too perfect. One couldn't help but touch her. There was no more after that. There's no point in staying. Ing Fangzhou wiped the blood off his face and expressionlessly pulled out the bone spurs and abnormal tissues that grew out of his body. He asked coldly, in this gamble, do you still expect to dig out anything useful from your opponent? Huaishur shrugged and complained, "This is the only bad thing about card games. The degree of freedom is too low. Even if there was a vast and endless Gaia fragment in front of them, enemies from countless hells, and the gathering of all the elites of the present realm, it was still a gamble in the hands of the players. With the safety of the present realm as a chip, and the records of events represented by the All-Ages tablet as a chess piece, a war was waged. Both sides descended in the form of information, like records. Even if they died, they could return to their bodies. Moreover, they could clearly distinguish between friend and foe. There was no gap for others to exploit. For Huaishur, who liked to use tricks and other means, it was a nightmare. The days are getting worse and worse. Huaishur looked up to the sky and sighed. The good days are about to come to an end. He wasn't arrogant enough to think that he could repeatedly jump around in hell just by relying on golden thighs. When facing the top opponents in the entire abyss, even 2 golden thighs weren't enough. He could already foresee the crazy counterattack of hell in the future. Are you going to run? Leaning on the chair, old lady Evelyn suddenly asked, "Of course I'm going to run, and I have to run fast. I have to run at a high standard, an exciting level." Huaishur suddenly stopped spinning the metal piece at his fingertips, reflecting his smile. "But before that, since I'm already here, I have to do something big first, right?" Even if he wanted to run, it had to be a hit and run. It was too shameful for him to fall down before the other party could do anything. Therefore, he had to think of a way to give him a hard time. Even if you want to do something, you have to have the capital. Chasel poured cold water on him. "Think carefully. There are only a few people. There's nothing to do. I'm an old woman. I can't afford to be tossed around. At this time, we can only play to the traditional advantage of celestial genealogy." Huaishur slapped his knee. "Let's summon people." Regardless of when celestial genealogy had such a good tradition, from today onwards, it would be like this. Therefore, under the fog unfolded by Yun Zhongjuan, Huaishur's communication flew to the distance behind him through the vice principal's relay. "Hello, is little Liz there? Oh, don't be so distant. We're so familiar with each other. We've been through life and death together. Hello, is old lady Qing there? Are you in good health? Don't you think I miss you? I want you to give me more guidance. Hello? Rome. Oh, Mr. Vulcan, I've heard a lot about you. Oh, Senior Blade Master is also there? Just in time. Do you want to do something big?" In less than 5 minutes, Huaishur's proposal had been conveyed to every player and the leader of the genealogy. Everyone's first reaction was to take off their glasses and rub their eyes. Then they asked Huaishur if he had made a mistake. But then everyone felt that there seemed to be something going on. When Huaishur took out the big cake that he had prepared, everyone who originally wanted to be reserved for a while could not help but begin to feel tempted. As the leader of the Gaia Fragment Middle East genealogy, old lady Qing did not hide anything and asked directly, "What do you want to do after all this trouble?" Huaishur replied without hesitation, "Of course, I want to kill those sons of bitches from Golden Dawn." "Ha ha!" Emperor Qing sneered and did not give face at all. "Putting selfishness above public duty doesn't look like the head of the family, Huaishur. Look at what you're saying. Isn't this the benefit of being the head of the family?" Huaishur replied calmly, "Sometimes it's not a big deal when selfishness and public duty overlap. You've become thick-skinned. Huaishur." Emperor Qing sighed. Huaishur just smiled and took it as a compliment from old lady Qing. "But I still have a question," Emperor Qing asked coldly. "Since you admit that this is a personal grudge, why should I help you? Isn't this what you're happy to see?" Huaishur laughed. "Since you need a fuse to ignite the dynamite between the present realm and hell, what do you think? Then why can't I be the fuse? as a veteran shit-stirrer. He was the sort of disaster that would blow up wherever he went. He knew his troublemaking nature too well. Wasn't it a critical moment between the present realm and hell on the verge of breaking out? Who else could be up to this important responsibility other than himself? Emperor Qing did not speak again. He did not comment, but before ending the communication, he laughed one last time. Although he's still a little inexperienced, his attitude of who else can do it but me is a little bit of utopia. As a result, from the moment the agreement was reached, within 2 days, the entire camp in the present realm was in full swing in preparation for the upcoming war. On the one hand, the ostentatious display of heavy troops constantly harassed the defense line of hell. On the other hand, they were secretly preparing for a transfer. They were waiting for the signal from afar, waiting for the arrival of the war. And now, when this iron fist formed by the 5 fingers of the present realm was revealed under the light of the day, there was only one result left. Wrapped in the power accumulated over a long period of time, it was mercilessly thrown forward. There was no need for refined meat or fat meat, and there was no need to carefully cut it into minced meat. It was not specially made to entertain you. As long as a soy sauce shop was opened on your head, red, white, and purple would flow out. And what was even more creepy was that as the rounds turned, all the chess players of the present realm uniformly showed kind smiles to their opponents. In their hands, the cards that they had formed for 3 rounds were thrown out as if they were free. At this moment, countless rays of light fell from the sky like meteors. Thus the world shook. Framework, our realm of myriad transformations, the combination of the laws from the Creator, instantly broke through the blockade of hell, once again opening up the 4 sides of heaven and earth, blessing all the ascendants with the protection of the present realm. Miracle mark cherubims, the emblem of an archangel with 6 overlapping wings, suddenly appeared between heaven and earth, sweeping away all the curses and precipitation of hell. The 4-edged rotating flaming sword guarding in front of the gate of Eden slashed down from the sky without warning, stabbing into the ground, instantly causing thick smoke to spurt out from the soil. Deep underground, countless worms were incinerated into ashes. Then, miserable shrieks could be heard. Then, stars fell like rain. Countless miraculous rays of light descended from outside the chessboard, landing between the present realm and hell, forming an army from myths. Longbow guards, Night Hospitaller, American skin flayers, Rakshasa, abyss white-dubs, countless enemies appeared out of thin air, causing the jesters' water mirrors to be crushed. Furious roars. What the hell? What was going on? Just for one why sure, the entire present realm was going to go bankrupt. Such a sudden and drastic change left everyone dumbfounded. It was hard to understand. What kind of logic was this? Where did they get so many source substances? Where did they get so many reserves? Where did they get the money? Why was it so different from the data they had calculated? Where did the gap in the middle come from? The answer was given by why sure. Admittedly, the rulers were very thorough in their considerations. They came to the most correct conclusion at the first moment, understanding the destructive power why sure could cause, and gathered their forces to the greatest extent, intending to destroy this disaster in one fell swoop. The only thing they neglected was how ridiculous Bichimo's ability to produce and pay as a high-grade celestial genealogy building was. It was just like how people would always forget that Heaven's Inquisition was actually a support system. There would always be people who would be confused by Bichimo's terrifying appearance, causing them to overlook its essence. Because it was too similar to existences like the Rancher and the Beast of Eternal Life, it caused everyone to misunderstand, thinking that this monster was some kind of terrifying weapon of war. But in fact, it wasn't like the Rancher who devoured everything for its own sake, nor had it built any cycle of the abyss food chain. Although it was huge and tenacious, it was only mediocre when compared to the Beast of Eternal Life. Its terrifying appetite was to allow its huge body to grow even further, while its huge body was for better appetite and digestion. Endless devouring, endless growth. This body was a temple formed by the combination of endless source substances, miracles, and disasters. If the greatest miracle that had appeared during the Night of the Witch was the Silver Ocean, then this body was the vessel that the Silver Ocean relied on to survive. But since it was a vessel, it meant that the things that were put in could be taken out again. It was like a piggy bank filled with piggy banks, a safe with 4 legs, or a bank vault with a big mouth. This thing was a super large power bank. Now, after 3 days of gorging itself, relying on the rewards and feeding of its old friends from hell, Bichimos, who was as huge as a mountain, lay down on the battlefield in satisfaction. Licking its lips, it observed the battle that was close at hand. On its back, a massive halo of light burned like a sun. Endless amounts of origin substance surged, releasing a blinding light. The silent hymn was played once again. Holy! Chapter 1136. The moment the hymn rang out, everything was completely different. The loud noises and roars that rose and fell on the battlefield seemed to have been given substance. Under the control of invisible hands, they burst forth, spread, and surged unceasingly. It was obviously a fleeting scream, but the lingering sound lingered in the ears, wishing to linger for 3 days. It was clearly a majestic sound that caused the earth to crack, but before it could spread out, it was crushed to death in its cradle. Only a faint moan like that of a mosquito was drowned out by the noise that was like a tide. At this moment, all the sounds seemed to have lost their original rhythm and form. Under the gaze of a certain pair of eyes, they rapidly changed, grew, or were cruelly cut off. In the end, they turned into invisible blades and swords. The hymn that belonged to the rancher thus fell apart under the shaking of the waves, dissecting into meaningless fragments. It was as though in the midst of the endless slaughter and struggle of the war, there was only one main axis left between the heavens and the earth. The only sound, the hymn of praise that lingered above the wheel of light. Impudent! The saint of hell roared furiously. Scarlet flames burned fiercely in his hollow eyes. Under the siege of Turl and Cypatotic, he suddenly turned his head and looked with resentment at the center of the enormous wheel of light, the mountain-like head of Bichimos. Why sure? On the flat surface of the dog's head, the young man sitting cross-legged seemed to have heard a call from afar. He raised his head slightly. Then he withdrew his gaze without any interest. Whistling, he picked up the boiling kettle and poured hot water into the teacup, looking down at the appearance of the tea leaves floating in the water. Finally, he picked up the teacup and took a sip. The smell of smoke and blood in the wind was replaced by the bitter tea fragrance. He smacked his lips, frowned, and poured the tea into the wind. He continued to boil water. Humming a song, he leisurely enjoyed the scenery. Obviously, he was the one who started the war, but now he was completely uninvolved. He was calm and leisurely. He had already spent money to hire people to fight. So why should he personally go into battle? A third rank? A gift? This time, the 6 major sects are besieging the light summit. He slapped his knee and sighed. Finally, he waved his fist and shouted at his allies. There's no need to follow the rules of the martial world when dealing with these demons. Everyone attack together. Attack together. Now, not to mention the solidifiers in the abyss, even Kwafu couldn't help but want to smash his head with a hammer. Under the tax officer's angry roar, dust flew up and the earth shook. Suddenly, a scarlet color of blood rose from the crowd that was slaughtering like a black tide. Countless pale, white skeletons piled up in one place, transforming into a colossus of skeletons that was hundreds of meters tall with 2 heads and 4 arms. Wantonly trampling on the dust beneath its feet, it charged madly towards Bichimos. Good job, kill him. Kill this bastard with one punch. This thought surfaced in the minds of countless allies. But very soon, they came to their senses. This bastard must not die. If he did, Bichimos' source substance supply would be gone. At present, a large part of the source substance used by all the fifth-rank cultivators on the battlefield came from Bichimos' light wheels. Once Bichimos was damaged, everyone would be cut off from the internet. You want to cut off my Wi-Fi? In your F***King dreams. An angry roar rang out. Under the siege of the dwarf hunters from the thunderous sea, Kwafu lifted the golden fishing rod in his hand without even turning his head, and threw it behind him. The fishing rod forged from Shoyang mountain copper, and miracle of longbow expanded against the wind, crossing more than half of the battlefield. In an instant, under the guidance of the fishing hook, the thin-line soared in the air like a bird, coiling around the colossal bone and gently hanging on it. Immediately after, the ground within a radius of 1 mile sank by 60 centimeters. Amidst the rumbling sounds of mountains collapsing, the colossal statue was actually pulled by the thin line, dragged by Kwafu. It involuntarily rose into the air and made a circle on the battlefield. Wherever it passed, countless people were tossed into the air like ants. A deep fissure was formed where it landed. Above the crack, the flames gathered once again, forming the burning silhouette of Agni once more. Someone heard the Indian level 5 curse. If not for his quick reaction, he would have been buried alive by his allies. However, on the battlefield, the one with the greatest momentum was neither Kwafu nor the giants from the Americas. Instead, it was the dazzling bolt of lightning that wandered in the blood tide at the center of the battlefield. Following Lord Yun Zhongjuan's will, a forest of thunderbolts pierced out from the clouds. However, they did not dissipate. Instead, they solidified in the air as if they had materialized, gradually forming a cage of destruction. The heavenly drum vibrated, producing a loud sound. Countless raindrops fell, turned into water vapor, and rose into the air, once again forming a huge cycle. Countless dead lives, shattered souls, and even dissipated source substances were included in this cycle, gathering in Ing Fangzhou's hands. Raising thousands to serve one. A control-type support like Lord Yun Zhongjuan was just so annoying. Once the cycle was formed, in his cycle, regardless of whether they were enemies or friends, willing or not, they were all a part of the cycle and would provide him with power. It was just like how once Huaishi's heavenly palace was opened. All the dead souls on the battlefield would be forged into iron in the furnace. The larger the battlefield, the more people there were, and the more chaotic it would be. The more dissipated source substances, miracles, and disasters, the more power would flow into his hands in the end through the cycle. According to the original setting, he should have blessed his allies with this power so that there would be no shortage of people. But for Ing Fangzhou, allies? What allies? I don't see them. As the former #1 attacker of the Path of Heaven's Inquisition, giving up his position? That's impossible. You guys lie down, I'll take over. Now, the 6th degree purified lightning gathered above the waters of hatred, wantonly scattering everywhere. Wherever it passed, the blood sea collapsed, the tide was torn apart, and everything in its path was swept away. With Lord Yun Zhongjuan's rank, this destructive power was already above that of many level 5 existences. And right in front of him, the demon, who was directly hit by the waters of hatred, fell into the blood sea again. But then he rose up again, laughing wildly in excitement. That's it. Ing Fangzhou, that's it. Let me see your angry face more. It's so delightful. Gallo laughed wildly. There was only a small wound on his gold-studded body, but he was not damaged at all. In his hand, the king's sword of nobility, which had been bestowed upon him by the withered king, shone brightly and emitted a boundless evil light. This was a reward comparable to the position of a ruler, as the guard and follower of the king of Withered, and the leader of the imperial guards. Gala had made many contributions to the fallen country in a long time. The king of Withered even bestowed authority as a reward in feffing the territory of the fallen country and promoting him to a member of the ruler. But the demon scoffed at this generous reward. In the entire abyss and countless hells, there was only one true ruler and true emperor. Other than that, everyone else was just a figurehead. This was his answer. Was he happy because of this loyalty, or was he laughing because of this stubbornness? No one knew the meaning of the king of Withered's laughter. He just casually threw the crown aside, and then bestowed a sword as a reward for his loyal hound. From that moment on, Gala became the hand of the fallen country. Wherever the king's sword of nobility was, all the forces of the fallen country's army would surrender in front of this sword, offering their souls, bodies, blood, bones, and even everything. Even the other rulers of the fallen country would do the same. This was the genuine sword of 10,000 armies. With this sword, one could mobilize the power of the army and a large group of people without limit and integrate it into oneself. Now, Gala had truly become the embodiment of the fallen country. He unleashed this power so wantonly that he did not care about his allies. He even crushed the worms and monsters that rushed up to get in his way, just to fight to his heart's content. The storm rose from the ground under the slash of the sharp blade, turning into a tornado that rose into the sky against the lightning. It wandered wantonly, sweeping up a large amount of blood and corpses, decorating the stage that belonged to the war. Blood and lightning collided fiercely. Yun Zhongjuan snorted coldly, and the lightning in his hand trembled, faintly showing signs of collapse. But soon, the lightning condensed again. After turning from pure white to pitch black, it underwent 3 more evolutions. Now, there was no longer the outline of lightning in his hand, only a strange halo that filled the air. 9 degrees of purification. Again, the heavenly palace roared, and tens of thousands of lightning bolts fell. The battle was not just in the hinterland of hell. Whether it was the chess players in the present realm or the leaders of the various lineages, they would never allow such a precious opportunity to be wasted. Just when most of the forces of the abyss were involved in another place, a fierce attack on the enemy's border began again. Although 2 days of preparation was not enough to form a decisive advantage in a short period of time, with the sudden attack at this moment, the front line had begun to move forward. Above the sky, the violent bombardment of the imprint of Miracle Fuso fell, and countless wood demons had torn apart the Rashomon line of defense set up by the Golden Dawn. A large number of wood demons drove straight in, and under various spells such as shrinking and shifting, they pushed forward with terrifying efficiency. On the eastern front, after 4 pastures were uprooted in a row, the fasting circle of the blessed land was in imminent danger. Amidst the pure white smoke from the burning of the holy oil, the knights from the Russian alliance roared and shouted. They were clad in heavy armor, and the huge horses they rode neighed as they ran amok among the countless domesticated monsters. It was as if an invisible plow had been shoveled down from the sky, plowing blood and death. Wherever it passed, a deep crack had been dug out in the black tide. Straight forward, from one end of the battlefield, they dug through to the other end. Then they turned around and did it again. When tens of thousands of troops gathered as one, the knights blessed by the Holy Spirit merged into one, sharing the same soul, the same miracle, and the same blessing. The badge of the Maltese cross was like an eagle flapping in the smoke. And in this turbulent battle, there seemed to be a moment of complete silence. All the noise disappeared without a trace, and all the movements froze in the air. The galloping knights stopped abruptly in the midst of the enemy, and everyone was frozen in place. Then shrill screams spread out from under the armor, and distortion and solidification spread among the army that had turned into a record of events. In just 3 short flicks of the fingers, the holy light disappeared without a trace. What replaced it was a viscous black flame that flowed out continuously from the gaps of the armor. The distorted giant horse slowly turned around and faced its allies behind it. A brazen change of sides. At this moment, outside the chessboard, the pure white of the Night Hospitaller had been completely dyed black. With the sudden solidification, the label that appeared on the chessboard also changed slowly, revealing a mocking smile to the chess players. Night Hospitaller, Woodman. From this moment onwards, this large group of elites broke away from the hands of the present realm and belonged to the ranks of hell, becoming the vanguard of hell. And it was through this short gap that the power of the jesters merged into the battlefield, causing the originally clear situation to once again return to chaos. As for the feelings of the chess players, perhaps only the word disgusting could describe it. Damn, the Golden Dawn. It was just like facing the hell creatures in the Utopia. Now, it was the turn of the present realm's sublimators to angrily scold how there was such a thing that messed with people's minds. As a member of the Golden Dawn, Woodman, who now used Faust as a medium to descend, had lost his framework and laws. Now, he was the incarnation of the devil Mephisto, and he only had 2 skills, formlessness and shift. The former allowed Woodman to not have a physical body, and he could not be killed by material or source attacks. The latter allowed him to quickly corrupt and control all creatures with souls with a sufficient supply of source substances. If sublimators with independent souls were a little difficult to deal with, dealing with this large group that could only produce qualitative changes in numbers was easier than yawning for him. Unless it was a stigmata that specialized in controlling souls or a divine mark in the same field, it was a nightmare. Not only could they not be killed, driven away, or dispelled, but if they were not careful, they could be read, brainwashed, and corrupted. They were like flies that kept buzzing in their ears, disgusting to the core. At this time, they could only use something even more disgusting. Only magic could defeat magic. If they encountered someone who messed with their minds, they could only use a more mind-messing method to get back at them. At that moment, the chess player from India, Arudni, threw out the card in his hand expressionlessly. Sincerity, stone curse immortal. A level 5 sublimator from India who maintained the system, the peak of all ascetic practices and cultivation, the embodiment of all things karma, Brahman immortal. Now, feel the horror of great wishes and curses. Chapter 1137. Before the era of humans, there was a time when the gods had yet to fall, and the gods were the dominant ones. Going back to that distant era, the only iron law of the 3 major blockades that formed the world today was all things perish. Even the seed of the pioneer society had not been born yet, and everything was under the control of the gods. The prosperity and cruelty of that time had already been passed down to the present day in countless myths and legends, narrated and told by various characters. At that time, Dongsha, Rome, Northern Europe, Greece, Aztec, and even Sumer, and many more gods and characters had yet to leave the stage. In order to fight for the will of heaven, in order to achieve it, in order to get rid of it, the gods fought and worked together endlessly until they finally fell. Among the many gods, in terms of foresight and preparedness, it was the Northern Europe that was the first to predict the end of the world. In terms of flexibility, it was the Greek and Roman divine systems that were inextricably linked with each other. In terms of cruelty and struggle, it was the Aztec divine system that was constantly fighting among itself and had changed its sun god 6 times. In terms of order and stability, it was the Dongsha divine system that was second to none. But even among so many gods, the Indian divine system was an out-and-out oddity. Whether this title was a compliment or a derogatory one, perhaps the later generations could not make a judgment. There was no other reason. It was because the Indian gods were too wild. So wild that it made people panic. In terms of playing, the Indian gods were too good at it. They could play, knew how to play, and dared to play. Each time they played, it got bigger and bigger. Even the later Indian divine system itself felt that even if the gods did not fall, the Indian divine system would be gone. It was not an exaggeration at all. What was India? I will do what you don't dare to do. I will do what you don't dare to do. I will do what you can do, and I will do what you can't do, and I will do it by force. In order to break free from the mandate of heaven, the Indian gods had used all kinds of methods and evil methods. Just by looking at the internal division into three parts and the inability to be integrated, one could tell that everyone had played with all kinds of ideas in the past, and they were constantly coming up with strange ideas. First, the three gods of creation, destruction, and maintenance took the lead, and the people below followed suit and carried forward. Just the internal structure alone had collapsed countless times. The number of times the Indian domain had been restarted due to crashes was uncountable. The more he played, the wilder he became, and the more experience he had in passing the buck and making up for his mistakes, the more experienced he became. Among the gods, they were truly the most cunning ones. Just by looking at how even Tangi had failed at Sulyer's hands, one could tell that they had their ways. And it was in such a bizarre environment that countless experiments produced not only the legacies and castes that had long since split apart, but also the terrifying beings known as immortals. Tracing back to the beginning, no one knew which great genius was the one who first came up with the idea of asceticism. Through endless torture and trials, some mortals with the bloodline of the gods were pushed into an unimaginable hell. They were supported by secret discussions and supported by laws. Through this so-called cultivation, their souls were repeatedly forged, and forged again like iron. In the end, they created a brilliance that even the gods would be amazed by. Through countless transformations of the source form, one soul was endlessly polished. It was not close to the gods, but carried out the word, I, condensed from one's own will and desire, and finally reached the realm of Brahman as imagined. This was the so-called Brahman, and I as one. Then the gods began to feel numb. Indeed, as they had guessed, through this method, humans could also have a direct connection with the three pillars and assimilate their souls with the rules of the present realm, comprehending Brahman, and could almost be regarded as part of the present realm's incarnation. However, this process was completely uncontrollable, and the results were completely unpredictable. The side effects, including the personality mutation and the loss of control of obsession, were unavoidable. One by one, 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 and one by one, one by one, one by one, and in the end it was destined to self-destruct because of the excessive proximity to the three pillars. Moreover, the most frightening thing was that due to the mutation of the soul, almost every immortal was proficient in the manipulation of fate and cause and effect. In the heyday of the seven immortals, the whole of India was stirred up by the ascetics. Vows could shake the heavens, and curses could crack the earth. Because of the vows and curses of the immortals, countless gods had perished or been injured. Even the three prime gods had suffered miserably. Shiva, Brahma, and Vishnu did not escape, and were even forced to reincarnate or bow to the immortals to apologize, kowtow, and admit their mistakes. The tools rode on their necks, not almost, but had become masters. It was precisely because of this that the three great gods learned from their painful experience, and forcefully reduced the immortal profession by several versions, not stopping until they perished. But even so, the ascended immortals with the bloodline of gods were still the most feared and feared of all the Tier 5 immortals. Even if the average lifespan did not exceed 60, even if they only had one breath left, it was enough for them to make wishes and curses that corresponded to the world and fate. In the current state of India's fragmented lineage, this was no doubt a strategic weapon, a lineage treasure that could not be used again after each use. At this moment, when the radiance of the stone incantation immortal descended from the sky, even the fragment of Gaia that had been dead for an unknown number of years suddenly trembled, like a dead corpse suddenly convulsing. It radiated a new wave of bizarre vitality. The sky suddenly turned blood red, and the wind carried with it the cries of the distant past. A viscous rain of blood fell from the sky, and the entire border battlefield seemed to be soaked in the stench of cursed blood. He was clearly an immortal, but he had a sinister aura that even rulers could not hope to match. The old and stooped elder, who looked like a living fossil, sat cross-legged in the air. His thin body did not move, and his pitch-black eyes were empty, dead like bones. Even the sound of his heartbeat was indiscernible. At the corner of his mouth, there was a strange smile that chilled the hearts of hell's masses. His lips did not move, but a hoarse voice that was indistinguishable between a man and a woman resounded through the world. It was as though the world was his throat, speaking freely. "Benevolent Brahma, I make a great wish today. Complete everything, destroy all evil, and subdue all calamities." Instantly, the rain of blood dissipated, and the sky turned clear. Boundless light appeared out of nowhere, illuminating the entire battlefield, as though it had turned into a heavenly kingdom under the illumination of the light. Countless petals fell. It was as though they were harvesting wheat. Wherever the petals passed, no matter how ferocious the monsters were, whether they came from hell or even the condensed ones, the contracted employees of the eternal group, the pygmy giants in the Sea of Thunder, or the zombies of the fallen nations that had long since died, all of them instantly knelt on the ground. Even the chariots and city walls, which had no idea what was going on, shrank and collapsed. A joyful smile appeared on every face, brimming with the radiance of happiness. In unison, they praised the great immortal, the epic, the world-shaking asceticism, the endless blessings, and the supreme righteous Dharma. Even the Asuras of the Blood Sea and the stubborn Rakshasa could become the guardians of the righteous Dharma, let alone others. At this moment, under the immortal's righteous Dharma, all evil was cleansed. All of the Hell's armies became the vanguard of the present realm, fighting to be the first to point their swords at their allies behind them. There was a soft smack. The body of the stone incantation, immortal, trembled, faintly turning transparent as though it was condensed from smoke. It was even more otherworldly. The progress of nirvana had greatly increased due to the backlash of fate. However, the stone incantation immortal remained unmoved. His hollow eyes were emotionless as they reflected the huge fasting circle in the distance. The chill that enveloped the entire world suddenly descended, as if it would freeze all souls. Within the fasting circle, the expressions of many hunting angels and shamans changed abruptly. They launched a desperate counterattack and encircled the immortal. However, it was too late. Evil demons who do not know righteous Dharma and reason. You do not respect the true form of the supreme mysteries of the world. You do not practice the Dharma that leads to kindness and morality. What you worship is the filthy, illegal, and impure demon lord. You will never possess the purity and wisdom of the gods. The immortal's curse reverberated between heaven and earth. Every word was like a tragic wail intertwined with a landslide and a crack in the sky. With every word he uttered, the solidified divinity surging within the fasting circle dissipated a little. In the end, even the projection of paradise had a huge crack. From one end of the land to the other, the aftermath of the terrifying curse tore a smile apart, swallowing half of the fasting circle. Countless hunting angels were melted by the darkness amidst their screams and wails, vanishing without a trace. Earth-shattering shockwaves spread out, covering an area of 1,000 kilometers. The instant the curse ended, the stone incantation Immortal's body silently ruptured with dozens of crisscrossing cracks. His presence became increasingly faint, like a bubble. He was so transparent that one could clearly see the scene behind him. However, in the end, he did not waver in the slightest. When he reached the end of the sky, a murderous intent suddenly descended from the sky, enveloping him within. "Old bastard, you're still alive?" A long-awaited greeting seemed to come from the wind. The projection of a golden body that seemed to be cast from ancient bronze appeared, and the heretic king descended once again. He clenched his iron fist and mercilessly punched at the senior who had taught him the essence of asceticism in the past. The punch that came from 1,000 kilometers away actually caused the air to condense into a solid state the moment it descended, shrinking inwards inch by inch. The power that was enough to crush atoms into fission was used in an unreasonable manner here, trampling all the ascendants around him into dust. Then, a clear and cold cry flashed past. A metallic light appeared. The remnants of the blade dissipated in the air, along with the heretic king's full-powered punch, disappearing without a trace. It was as if the sun had suddenly emerged from the ground, a cold light that was so dazzling that it could tear apart all the eyes rose from the ground and slashed towards the sky. "Long time no see, senior." The face of the sword saint suddenly appeared in front of the heretic king. He laughed loudly, and a ray of intense light condensed in his hand burst forth, as if the mighty sun had descended from the sky, leaving nowhere to run. "Let's start over. Katana of the Sun." Chapter 1138. From that moment onwards, from the borders where the flames of war raged to the heart of hell that was constantly changing, the entire sky had become a battlefield for the sword saint and the heretic king. Even the air of nothingness had turned into formless blades and swords in the turbulence caused by the collision of supremes. The turbulence swirled rapidly, forming a cruel domain like a meat grinder. Not a single bird could rise above the clouds 6,000 meters above the ground. This change was enough to shake the entire battle. It was unavoidable that the ascendants who were fighting each other were distracted. It had nothing to do with concentration. It was just an instinct in a chaotic battle. Who could let such a sharp killing intent fly past them without being moved? At that moment, the monk hidden in the shadows opened his eyes. The radiance of the enlightened one appeared in his pitch-black pupils. "Charles Bennett, Golden Dawn, Primordial Road, Tier 5 Solidified One, the manifestation of hell's essence and original darkness, abyss of nothingness Abu Su. Now is the time." No matter how the situation changed, the solidified one who had never wavered raised his hands and quietly put his palms together. Pop! As if a bubble had been popped, the entire battlefield suddenly shook. It was as though nothing had happened. There were no loud noises or tremors, nor were there any signs. However, when all the ascendants felt the chill behind them and turned their heads, they saw that the mountain-like Bichimos had already vanished without a trace, along with Huaishur, who was above their heads. On the empty land, there was only darkness and shadows of nothingness left. It could not be touched or interfered with like the most distant mirage. It had been swallowed. In Sumerian mythology, the miracle known as the origin of Genesis had reappeared here in the form of a calamity. The height of the heavens had no name. The richness of the earth has never been given a name. The spirit of the abyss, Abu-Su, was the manifestation of this vast primordial emptiness. Now, the prison that sealed time and space had been created once again. The endless space was nested inwards without any gaps, forming an eternal labyrinth. Even the Tier 5 Kronos and Vice Headmaster Isaac couldn't break free from such a seal when they raided the Ivory Tower. After hiding for a long time, Bennett took advantage of this rare opportunity and made a ruthless move. In the blink of an eye, Bichimo's connection with the outside world was severed. Together with Huaishur, they fell into the darkness of the abyss. In the deepest part of the labyrinth, Bennett looked down from the void. His face was expressionless. The monk who had once been praised as the one closest to the enlightened one did not hide his killing intent and decisiveness at all. The labyrinth of space and time closed inwards, rapidly squeezing and eroding all space. The primordial water manifested from the essence of the abyss was like a strong acid that corroded Bichimo's existence, trying to completely dissolve it in the darkness. But soon, his eyes went blank for a moment. Under the corrosion of the poison of inception, Bichimo's, which was originally as huge as a mountain, actually began to shrink rapidly. Like a balloon that had long since run out of air, the halo dissipated without a trace. It no longer had the mighty battle formation it displayed in the outside world. Its stomach was completely empty. All of its reserves had long been emptied. It was just for show. Now, after being completely beaten back to its original form, it had turned into a silly dog the size of a calf. It tried to dog paddle in the poisonous waters of the abyss, clinging onto a huge rock that had yet to dissolve, and shaking its wet butt. It was shaking. Bennett woke up from his stiff state. He suddenly looked to the side of the huge dog, as though he had understood something. Huaishur, amidst the corrosion of the endless surging poisonous waters, a tape recorder fell out from under Huaishur's, but as it rapidly dissolved, it was still playing non-stop lines such as, "Gaia may be big, but we have nowhere to retreat. Behind us is the realm of discovery." There were also several notes that could help actors deepen their memory. As for Huaishur, he didn't seem to understand the situation at all. He was still grinning, foolishly. He wriggled a little in the poisonous pool, raised his hand, and scratched his itchy butt. And so, behind his corroded pants, a glittering golden tail was revealed, swinging nimbly with the wind. What the hell? Under the broken disguise, for monkey-like faces appeared from the front, back, left, and right of the head. When the 8 hands pulled out their own hammers, tridents, holy bottles, sharp swords, treasured sabers, and other weapons, even the most obtuse person should have understood. How was this a tool of celestial genealogy? This was clearly India's living miracle, Hanuman. It wasn't just Bichimo's. Even the Sephora poems were F*King fake. But it was real. Amidst the gale that blew against his face, a horrifying realization and conjecture emerged in Bennett's mind. Where the hell did he go? 2 days ago, when the final communication was completed and all the plans were arranged properly, Liz, who represented the American genealogy, asked a final question. Since everyone has a clear division of labor and has their own tasks, what about you? She stared fixedly at her old rival in the projection, smelling an even more familiar scam from that familiar face. Huaishur, what are you going to do? Me? Huaishur smiled and winked at her. I'm going to send them off. It was as though everyone was playing a game together. Some were the mid-laner, some were the support, some were the jungler, and some were the flank. Some were in charge of leeching, some were in charge of snatching creeps from their teammates, and some were in charge of AFK. And since there was always someone who had to send them off, then why can't this person be me? Presently, When Bichimos was shrouded by the shadow of the abyss, it was almost impossible to distinguish between the front and back of the shadow of the abyss. At the very back of Inferno, the place that was currently the most defenseless and isolated from the world. In front of the gate of that pale white city, someone took off the disposable invisibility cloak made by Vulcan, the god of fire, raised his head, and flashed a hearty smile at the city gate that was close at hand. In that instant, all the projections in the gloomy palace turned their heads abruptly. Amidst the ear-piercing alarm, the scene from the gate was revealed to everyone. Even Alistair, who had been maintaining his calm all this while, turned his head abruptly and frowned, dumbfounded. In the image, the Ascendant, who now represented celestial genealogy, smiled reservedly as though he happened to pass by on his way back from grocery shopping. Relaxed and happy, he raised 2 fingers. As though he was knocking on a door, he knocked twice in the air. Conk, just like the opening of those old jokes and skits, he used the onomatopoeia of knocking on the door as a greeting to his opponents within the city. Dong, 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 dong. Someone was knocking on the door. Meanwhile, the masters within the gate were stunned on the spot, looking at each other in dismay. In this brief moment of deathly silence, no one asked a question. Only a crisp voice filled with enthusiasm and anticipation spread in the silence, anticipating a response. Who's outside the gate? Of course, it's fate, my friend. It was as though a mocking tone rang out in the illusion, conveying this contemptuous laughter to everyone's ears in a soft whisper. Now, your fate is knocking on the door. At that moment, in the image, the gentle smile could no longer conceal the ferocious malice. The hatred and anger hidden under the handsome appearance gushed out like a torrent. Under Hilghost's open lapel, in the crack on his chest, the blood of Gaia, which was generously given by the Russian Federation genealogy, once again appeared with a magnificent light. But this time, the dazzling light was no longer gentle. Instead, it surged like a raging fire, violently igniting him, engulfing him, and enveloping him in flames. The pain of his soul trembling spread. Huaisher couldn't help but bend down, open his mouth, and roar. A familiar voice rang in his ears once again. It was a question from his soul. Huaisher, what do you want? I want to become what I used to be. Huaisher covered his twitching face and squeezed out a happy smile. Just like that, he allowed the uncontrollable power to tear his body apart. Darkness gushed out, burning his body from the inside out. However, within the surging flames, a hoarse voice reverberated. I will become the embodiment of the utopia. I will follow the departed pioneers. It was a shattered soul burning in the endless flames. It was a declaration to the sky, the earth, the endless world, and the enemy in front of it. I will continue this hatred once again. The endless flames dissipated at this moment, and in their place was a crack that led to hell. Endless darkness gushed out, and in the darkness, the dead monsters screamed. Despair, resistance, struggle, killing, sacrifice, and even giving up everything born from the deepest hell, born from the cruelest battlefield, transformed from countless frozen souls, and returned from death and oblivion. It had once again descended on this long-lost world. At that moment, the sacrifice and exchange finally ended. On the chessboard, Huaisher's trembling cards were completely torn apart by an invisible force. But then, the shattered cards reassembled under the catalysis of Gaia's blood. The borders around the constantly changing cards turned from silver to gold, and then the resplendent color of diamonds appeared. Finally, they lost all color and condensed into a lightless pitch black. Judge Huaisher had disappeared without a trace. Now there was only endless darkness that soared into the sky. The torrent raged, whipped the earth, and tore the sky apart. In the end, in the rolling darkness, The upside-down emblem of the utopia was ignited once again. The silent monster woke up from its deepest dream. Its scarlet eyes were like burning stars. It made a final declaration to the trembling mortal world and its former enemy. It told them, "I am Nautilus." Now, a brand new record of events shrouded in pitch-black flames descended onto the chessboard. Under the protection and pursuit of endless calamities, it revealed its name, Inquisitor Nautilus. After 70 years, the judgment from the utopia returned from the deepest part of hell. Chapter 1139. The ground was dyed red by blood, and the sky was burned black by the flames. Between the broken heaven and earth, all the things that had passed away, the dead, the lost companions, the faces of those who sacrificed themselves, the smiling young people who fell in the ruins, their eyes empty, the old people who were struggling at death's door, the regretful and desperate warriors, the wounded who cried silently, and more faces that he didn't have time to remember. More hatred that he didn't have time to remember. Hatred, 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 hatred for everything in front of him, hatred for himself, hatred for hell, hatred for all enemies, hatred for the traitor who created all of this. In the depths of hell, in the surging darkness, a resounding voice rang out. It was so harsh, like a sorrowful cry overlapped with a furious roar. The voices of countless people echoed from the soul, and the memories of despair appeared again, filling his mind. Huaisher closed his eyes, but he couldn't avoid it. There was more power emerging from the darkness he had created. From his soul, the lost souls were reborn. Through his body, through his breathing, he breathed, and through his eyes, he saw the world. Then, the pair of eyes opened, burning with scarlet flames. Everything in the past came back again. The darkness that seemed to have substance roared and spread out, and it was difficult to distinguish between reality and illusion. Even Huaisher's outline was difficult to see. The monster that was forged by the essence of the abyss and the determination of the world was constantly changing its body, breaking through the barriers of the human body, and quickly adjusting the structure of its huge body. On the Nautilus that was covered in blood and fire, pairs of crazy eyes appeared. Like breaking through the sea, the monster flew out of the darkness with a hiss and brazenly crashed into the city gate that was close at hand, the so-called High Wall, the so-called Iron Wall, the so-called Independent Place. At this moment, under the impact of the Nautilus, cracks appeared. It was trembling. The heaven and earth roared, and the earth shook. Between the heaven and earth that had turned pure white, there was only this wriggling black madly rushing forward, leaving behind pitch-black traces. His last line of defense had fallen apart just like that, in this loud, cracking sound. The many projections in the palace instantly dimmed, and everyone looked at Alistair in shock. But Alistair didn't say anything. He just silently stared at the inky color that rose into the sky. After a long time, a strange expression appeared on his calm face. It seemed like a self-mocking smile, but it also seemed like a stunned anger. Entangling between his lips and teeth, it transformed into a kind of ferocious expression that made people shudder. In the beginning, it should have been a sure win situation, but as the series of events unfolded, the situation unknowingly changed. And at this moment, when he was at his weakest, when his joints were at their weakest, they were actually forced to the front by such a strange move. So, this is the disaster sword. I've really been played for a fool. The face that looked like a stone statue finally began to move. But there was something wrong. At this moment, they should be irreconcilable enemies, but he couldn't conceal his joy and happiness. "I'm sorry, everyone. It looks like the meeting is over," he said. "The war has already begun." And the enemy was right in front of him. In that instant, all communications in the palace were unilaterally cut off by Alistair, not caring about what those people wanted to say. Alistair closed his eyes on the throne, and his figure turned into a stream of light and dissipated. When he reappeared, he was already standing at the very top of the palace. He raised his hand and mobilized the power from the Book of Magic, causing the crumbling city to heal once more. The solidified being of Golden Dawn looked down at the rampaging darkness, no longer concealing his tracks and killing intent. "Come, come, why sure, I'm right here." What answered him was a roar that wanted to tear the world apart. It was like a call, a rebuke, a curse, or perhaps it was nothing. It was just a monster roaring at its prey, an enemy. Huaisher felt himself burning. This remnant of his soul was collapsing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The power that he had summoned, with Gaia's blood as the foundation, he had imported the records from the Book of Destiny. In one fell swoop, he had emptied more than half of Bichimos's origin substance reserves, as well as all the hellish precipitates and disasters that could not be used in the present realm. He had recreated those solidified souls filled with hatred and despair. He did not pursue stability or longevity. Instead, he used all the conditions he currently possessed to obtain the purest destructive power in this short war. But now, when this ferocious will that had been forged from countless frozen souls descended upon her, Huaisher actually began to feel like she couldn't bear the burden. Even when compared to the monster Nautilus at its peak, its current scale was not even 1%. But wasn't the reason why Nautilus was so terrifying precisely because of this hatred that would not change with the strength of its power? His body and soul were still too weak, not even enough to be a vessel for that power. Instead, they were assimilated by the negative will produced by the countless souls. Countless turbulence surged in the darkness. Countless deranged souls were instinctively tearing at his will. It would only take an instant for him to be completely annihilated. But fortunately, there was something more important in front of Nautilus at this moment: the location of the enemy. The former traitors were right in front of his eyes. The moment this reality was discovered, the countless turbulence of souls surging within Nautilus instantly calmed down. There was no need for discussion, no need for communication, and even no need for Huaisher to do anything. The hatred that filled the deepest parts of the souls uniformly pointed at the irreconcilable enemy. Under the guidance of Huaisher's will, with this hatred as the medium, they completely converged into one. If that's the case, in the deepest part of Nautilus, Huaisher felt the endless power and will operating. The surging darkness suddenly shook. Nautilus's huge shell was torn apart like a giant beast opening its mouth, revealing the sword of virtue that was rapidly condensing and growing within. The sword of virtue that was dyed pitch black no longer had any brilliance or flowing light, only a bone-chilling grayish black. Amidst the roars and screams of millions, dawn passed. Virtue was no longer there. There was no need to obediently walk into the quiet night. Roaring or screaming did not matter. Open your arms and embrace the darkness of the abyss and hell. Eternal darkness, eternal monsters were born here. It was no longer the dazzling flame of the past. At this moment, the surging flow of eternal darkness gushed out from the giant mouth. When humility degenerated into arrogance, loyalty mutated into lies, honor was abandoned, compassion was replaced by ferocity. From the solidified virtue, what was bred was a sin that surpassed all the poisons in the world. The palace collapsed. Wherever the light of darkness passed, blood-red flames burned everywhere. Like palms, they crazily pulled everything around them. Everything meticulously built by the Golden Dawn was shrouded in the flames, along with Alistair. But when the buildings were burned to ashes, the earth peeled off like a piece of paper, revealing countless words hidden under the surface. Countless records of events flowed in it, and the records that had been passed down in history were once again reshaped. All the collapsed buildings shrank toward the center and turned into a giant tower. At the top of the tower, Alistair reappeared. Go, go, sorrowful melody. The low chant from the solidified one echoed in the collapsed city. Be silent, sweet melody, or I can only cover my face and run. The poem of the past was recited again at this moment, but the meaning was so mocking. And under Alistair's command, the Book of Magic was activated again. From the endless records, he pulled out the part he wanted and condensed it into an ancient book that appeared in his hand. The chant continued. In an instant, a torrential rain poured down. Time fell like rain from the sky. The gloomy rain fell into the darkness and sizzled. The world was bleak. A corrosive stream that was not inferior to the blue crown dragons came down. Many rust marks quickly appeared on the body of the Nautilus. The scale-like armor quickly fell off and disintegrated. But then, in the torrential rain, countless strange flowers and plants grew out from under the cracks. They dotted the surging darkness and quickly withered, sprinkling countless iris flowers. Amidst the scattering petals, the enraged monster roared and changed its direction. Diving towards the tower, countless barriers shattered one after another. The steel on the Nautilus's ferocious horns grew rapidly, clanging in the darkness as they transformed into the shape of a giant hammer. An unexpected amount of power burst forth from it. Everywhere it passed, everything in its path was torn apart. Even the cover of the Book of Magic began to crack. Alistair's expression changed slightly. The book in his hand dissipated, and the remnant page of Boga Funga appeared for a moment. Immediately afterwards, the heretic monarch's projection appeared and punched at the falling Nautilus. In that moment, a blazing flame spewed out from the Nautilus's tail. The phantom of a wolf beast appeared. The origin substance in the depths of the darkness changed again. All of the surging souls condensed into the purest form. The pain and sorrow from the long struggle were given an unparalleled weight. The Nautilus's massive body had already been refined into Weischer's origin substance equipment. Hammer of Pain. The giant hammer and the steel fist collided in an instant. Accompanied by a shock wave, an earth-shattering explosion erupted. The heretic monarch's projection formed by the records of events was also cleanly shattered. The Nautilus with its broken horns had already smashed into the giant tower formed by the Book of Magic, causing the center of the tower to tremble. The spreading aftershock tore the pale earth apart. But the Nautilus strangely turned from a solid body into a shadow once again, condensing into a solemn outline from the darkness. The symbol of the Republic was still burning. It was unharmed, like a ghost, formless and formless. Please remember me as if I were the dead. In the depths of the collapsed ruins, Alistair's hoarse voice sounded again. My heart is buried here. Byron's poem reappeared. The earth trembled. The flowing words gathered in a blank space, forming countless secret arrays that overlapped with each other. Finally, the framework from the Creator appeared. Sharp double spiral crystal pillars rose from the ground, separating the inside from the outside and supporting the heavens and the earth. The essence of the Abyss bloodline was brewing in it. Mather's framework was actually used by Alistair without any hindrance. It was even no different from him being here. Countless ferocious giant trees rose from the ground. The living desire was recreated as a tool of war and instantly pierced toward the Nautilus. The sound like a baby crying sounded again. In an instant, countless roots wrapped around the Nautilus, absorbing the monster's power and germinating and growing. But in the Nautilus's angry roar, the scarlet blood fire reignited. The killing intent condensed into matter. Deep cracks bloomed on the body of the living desire, as if it was chiseled by a giant axe, quickly breaking and collapsing. Only the hair-raising, chewing sound spread in the darkness. The desire for the world, which was only an appearance, could not stop him. Even the real desire for the world was just prey in front of Nautilus. But in this short moment, outside the double spiral framework, the pure white city that was recreated lit up with a blazing light. Look, next to the throne of winter, the iceberg trembled when it heard the warning of the typhoon. As long as a cloud flashes with lightning, millions of islands will be illuminated by it. Under Alistair's call, under the broken clouds, a solemn rainbow rose inch by inch. The heaven ladder. In the deepest part of the independent place, the preheating of the Book of Magic was finally completed and entered a new stage, and the ruler's crown had been blessed on the head of the solidified one. You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.